Echoes in the Fog. Story number 1. To fall asleep under 30 minutes by quietly and relaxingly. Let's start the story. In the small coastal town of Harbor's Edge, the fog was not merely a weather pattern. It was a presence, a living, breathing entity that had taken on a life of its own. It wasn't like the fog they had known before, gentle and fleeting, rolling in with the tides and dissipating with the sun. No, this was something darker, more persistent. It crept into every corner, slithering through the narrow streets like a silent predator with no intent of retreat. It clung to the ancient stone buildings, wrapping itself around the foundations and seeping into the very heart of the town. The sun, a pale disk in the sky, cast a dim glow over the mist, unable to penetrate the oppressive gray. People moved through the streets in hushed, cautious silence, their eyes constantly scanning for movement within the fog. Even the brave among them had begun to fear the darkness. It was not something they could fight, only endure. The air was heavy, thick with an unsettling dampness that clung to the skin. The scent of salt mingled with something far more sinister, a metallic tang, cold and unyielding. Whispers drifted through the fog, low murmurs that seemed to carry more weight than they should. Voices long forgotten echoed faintly, calling out to the living in tones too soft to be real, but too haunting to be ignored. Those who ventured too far spoke of figures moving through the mist, at once human and yet somehow otherworldly. Their eyes glimmered with an eerie light, their movements fluid yet disjointed, as if they did not entirely belong to this world. The streets of Harbor's Edge were no longer familiar. The cobblestones, once solid and dependable, felt loose beneath the feet. They seemed to shift and ripple, as if the very foundation of the town was sinking into the abyss beneath. The buildings, old and worn, stood like watchful sentinels, their windows like hollow eyes that mirrored the endless fog. The doors creaked on rusted hinges, swinging open to reveal empty rooms that seemed to hold nothing but shadows. The mist had become an omnipresent force, suffusing the air with a sense of unease, pressing down on every thought and movement. At night, the town transformed into something out of a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. Candlelight flickered erratically, casting jagged, flickering shadows on the walls. Shadows that moved unnaturally, shifting in ways that defied the laws of physics. The streets were deserted, yet the whispers never ceased. The dead, once peaceful beneath their gravestones, were restless now. Their spirits had found a way to seep into the world of the living. The graves no longer felt like sanctuaries. They felt like doors that opened into dark realms no one could comprehend. Those who tried to defy the mist were lost. They would wander, endlessly searching for an exit that no longer existed. The boundary between reality and the unknown had become blurred. Time seemed fractured, moments stretched endlessly, and the past seeped into the present with haunting clarity. Some claimed they had seen faces from generations long past, their expressions twisted in anguish, trapped in an eternal torment beyond death. Others spoke of forgotten echoes, the voices of ancestors crying out in sorrow and regret, pleading for release from the weight of forgotten memories. The town's scholars, once revered for their knowledge of history and the natural world, had long since given up on explanations. Their ancient texts and cryptic rituals were useless against the fog's suffocating grasp. Even the priests, who had always offered solace through their prayers, now faltered, their chants echoing against the mist with no response. The dead had grown stronger, their whispers louder, their presence more insistent. The very essence of life seemed to be unraveling beneath the ever-looming fog. There were those who had stopped resisting altogether. They had succumbed to the haze, their minds losing grip on reality, drifting endlessly through memories and visions that blurred the line between past and present. The town had become a place of haunting beauty, majestic in its eerie decay, sinister in its rebirth of forgotten horrors. The fog, once an inconvenience of nature, had become the master of Harbor's Edge, a force that refused to relinquish its hold, even as the world seemed to crumble away. And as the days passed, the townsfolk knew there was no escape. The fog was not just a force of nature, it was something far more ancient, something that had been waiting for the perfect moment to rise. Harbor's Edge had become a reflection of the unknown, a place where reality dissolved into something far darker, far more terrifying. The dead weren't just haunting the town anymore, they were reclaiming it. Ella had always been drawn to the mysteries of Harbor's Edge. From the moment she was old enough to understand the stories, the haunting tales of restless spirits and the strange occurrences that seemed to plague the town held an almost magnetic pull on her. Her family had lived in Harbor's Edge for generations, their roots firmly planted in the town's turbulent history. Each stone, every shadow told a story, sometimes comforting, but more often than not, unsettling. The town wasn't just a place where her ancestors had built lives. It was a realm where the past and present converged in ways that defied logic. Her grandmother, a woman with silver hair and piercing eyes, would recount the stories with a solemn intensity that suggested far more than mere folklore. Harbor's Edge is a living thing, she would say, her voice a whisper against the backdrop of an ever-looming fog. It holds on to what it has seen, what it has endured. And sometimes, it demands to be remembered. Her tales were woven with threads of ancient rituals, forgotten pacts, and warnings that echoed through the decades. It was said that the fog wasn't a natural occurrence. No, it was a force of its own, an extension of the town's dark history. It wrapped the streets in a shroud, not to hide but to preserve. As a child, Ella would run her fingers along the weathered gravestones in the town's oldest cemetery, feeling a strange, almost magnetic pull toward the oldest sections. She could spend hours sitting in the mist, listening to the rustling of the trees and the distant hum of the sea, a sound that resonated with more than just the tides. The dead, her grandmother once told her, had never truly rested. They were bound to this place, their spirits lingering like threads that connected past and present. And it was their whispers that would sometimes reach out to the living, offering fragments of truths too terrifying to grasp. Even as she grew older, the pull only intensified. Her parents, though well-meaning, tried to steer her away from the deeper truths. They saw her fascination as something innocent, a phase that would pass with age. Yet, the more they tried to shield her, the more she became enveloped in the town's dark allure. She read ancient texts, delved into journals filled with cryptic messages, and unearthed forgotten family records, each discovery more unsettling than the last. Her mind became a vortex of half-understood knowledge, a tangled web of rituals and visions, where the boundaries between reality and myth blurred. The fog was never merely a backdrop to Harbor's Edge, it was an entity in and of itself. Thicker than air, heavier than memory, it seemed to seep into her very being. Ella had experienced strange dreams for as long as she could remember, dreams that felt more like memories, more like visions of events long past but oddly familiar. In these dreams, she wandered through shadowy corridors and empty halls, where ghostly figures would pass by in a blur of motion. Their eyes, hollow yet glimmering, would always find hers, locking her into a gaze that seemed to pierce beyond time. The townsfolk became wary of her, whispering behind closed doors that she was touched by the mist, that she had grown too attuned to the forces that shaped Harbor's Edge. Some avoided her altogether, as if proximity to her might invite the same restless spirits into their lives. But for Ella, this was never about fear, it was a calling. A need to understand, to grasp the tangled threads of a history that refused to remain buried. Every discovery felt like another step toward an unseen truth, a truth that clawed at her mind and soul, demanding release. Her family watched helplessly as she became consumed by her quest. They noticed the change in her, a quiet intensity, an unshakable determination that had replaced her youthful curiosity. Even the simplest moments seemed overshadowed by the weight of the past. Yet, despite their concern, there was a part of them that knew resisting would be futile. Harbor's Edge was more than a place. It was a force, and once it claimed you, it didn't let go easily. The town's old stories told of a time when the dead roamed freely, when the boundaries between life and death were thin and easily crossed. Over time, the living had built barriers to contain the spirits, but it seemed those barriers were weakening. The fog had grown thicker, and the whispers more insistent. And though many fled, seeking safety beyond its reach, Ella felt her place was here, at the heart of the darkness, where the threads of the past and present intertwined. In her heart, she knew that Harbor's Edge was not just a town, it was a living history, one that demanded a guardian. And whether she was ready or not, it seemed that role had already chosen her. She knew the stories, the fishing accidents, the vanished children, and the whispers of things that couldn't quite be explained. Tales of hauntings that spread through the narrow streets, leaving an unsettling sense of unease lingering long after the sun had set. Every family in Harbor's Edge carried their own haunting. Some held close to their hearts, others spoken in hushed tones, as if the very act of uttering them might invite something worse to come. But the fog was different. Nothing could prepare her for the fog. At first, it seemed almost comforting. A familiar sight for those who had lived near the sea for generations. A soft, swirling mist that blanketed the coastlines, rolling in with the evening tide and fading as the sun rose. But this wasn't just ordinary fog. It wasn't something so simple as nature's embrace. The fog of Harbor's Edge had a life of its own, as though the very air had been woven into a tapestry of sorrow, regret, and forgotten memories. It wasn't a passive presence. It pulsed and writhed with something ancient, something malevolent that seeped into the very essence of the town. The longer Ella stayed within its grasp, the more she realized the fog was alive, not with the natural forces of weather, but with the weight of centuries of history. Every breath she took felt heavier, the cold of the mist seeping into her bones and clouding her thoughts. Shadows flickered through the veil, appearing and disappearing in an instant, distorted by the shifting nature of the fog. Sounds echoed in a way that defied logic. Footsteps following her that turned into whispers, whispers that merged into faint, mournful cries. Voices hummed through the mist, blending past and present into a haunting symphony that felt eternal. Her family had always been tied to the town's secrets. Generations before her had built their lives upon the foundation of Harbor's Edge, and with that came knowledge, a deep, inherited understanding of the place's darker truths. They spoke of the settlers who had bargained with forgotten gods, of rituals performed beneath the shrouded moonlit skies to protect the town from the sea's wrath. But those protections had come at a cost. Over time, the town became a vessel for more than just the living. The dead, those who had been lost in the mist, had become an integral part of the fabric of Harbor's Edge. Ella had never fully understood the weight of that history until the fog began to consume her. It wasn't enough to hear stories or visit the old graveyards where the forgotten rested, it reached deeper than that. The fog carried the souls of those who could no longer find peace, and in its embrace, they became more than memories. They became real. She saw them, their forms translucent, sometimes indistinguishable from the mist itself, yet disturbingly familiar. Their eyes glimmered with haunting recognition, a silent plea that spoke through the still air. At first, she tried to fight the fog, to push through it with logic and reason, but soon she realized that resistance was futile. The more she struggled, the tighter its grip became. Her thoughts spiraled into a whirlwind of visions and fragmented memories, each moment blurring into the next. Time no longer felt linear. Hours felt like minutes, and minutes felt like lifetimes, stretched endlessly in the fog's embrace. When she tried to focus on the present, it was as though the world warped around her, slipping into alternate realities where past and future collided in chaotic, haunting glimpses. She often woke in the dead of night, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding in her chest as though she had been pulled into the depths of some ancient nightmare. The voices, the figures, sometimes they spoke to her, sometimes they didn't. But always, there was a sense of urgency, as if they needed something from her. Answers, closure, redemption. Each whisper carried with it an unbearable weight, a burden that pressed down on her until she could barely breathe. And though she tried to hold on to the fragments of her own identity, the fog continued to blur the boundaries between who she was and who she was becoming, a ghostly reflection of the town's torment. The townsfolk, too, had begun to notice the changes. Once friendly faces turned distant and wary, their gazes shifting uneasily when they spoke of the fog. The elders, especially, seemed to avoid her, their warnings more urgent, their words more cryptic. "The fog will claim you," they would say, just as it claimed those who came before. But Ella refused to believe it. She couldn't accept that the town's past would define her future. Yet, the deeper she journeyed into the fog's embrace, the more she realized how intertwined she was with the town's dark legacy. Her family's history, the stories of betrayal, lost love, and unfulfilled promises, were all sewn into the very fabric of the mist. The more she tried to separate herself from the weight of those burdens, the more the fog seemed to envelop her in its grasp, pulling her closer to the very edge of memory and existence. There were moments when she could feel her mind slipping away, fractured into fragments by the oppressive force of the fog. She would hear her own voice speaking strange, ancient tongues, or see reflections of herself standing beside her, only for those reflections to shift, becoming something else entirely, a twisted version of herself, lost and hollow. The line between reality and illusion blurred completely, until the fog itself became her only truth, an ever-present, consuming force that threatened to consume her entirely. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of deep orange and violet, the atmosphere of Harbor's Edge grew thick with anticipation. The familiar salty air of the coast, which once brought a sense of comfort, now felt heavy, weighted with an ominous presence that lingered far beyond the physical world. The gentle hum of waves crashing against the rocky shore had become a haunting echo, filling the silence with an unsettling resonance. The town had seen many things: seafaring legends, quiet tragedies, and whispered tales of things that couldn't quite be explained. Yet tonight, the boundary between reality and the unknown seemed to blur more than ever before. The mist began to creep over the shore like a living tide, its movements slow and deliberate. At first, it appeared innocent, an ordinary sea spray catching the light of the setting sun. But as the minutes passed, the mist thickened, weaving into a dense, pulsating haze that clung to the air, wrapping around the streets and homes with a chilling embrace. This wasn't natural. This wasn't simply a fog formed by the sea breeze and the shifting tides. It felt alive, a force beyond comprehension, a presence born from the town's darkest secrets and most painful memories. And in that fog, the dead began to return. What began as a mere whisper of something unnatural soon became a tangible force, stretching across the town like an inescapable web. Shadows flickered in the mist, their movements fluid, almost hypnotic. Faces appeared and disappeared in a blur of anguish and longing, their eyes hollow and haunting. Each step through the fog felt like plunging into a dream that wasn't quite hers. A dream where the dead no longer rested quietly, but demanded to be seen, heard, and remembered. The silence was oppressive, filled with soft echoes of past lives. Lives that had ended in ways too cruel, too sudden, or too unresolved to be forgotten. For generations, Harbor's Edge had held onto its secrets. It was a town shaped by the sea, its history painted with stories of lost fishermen, vanished children, and tragic accidents that seemed too frequent for coincidence. Tales of shipwrecks and ghostly sailors had been passed down through the generations, but what Ella had always dismissed as superstition now felt horrifyingly real. Every shadow cast by the flickering lamplights seemed to pulse with something ancient, something alive. The mist wasn't just a physical barrier. It was a portal into a realm where the dead were more than memories. They were forces shaping the world around them. The deeper Ella ventured into the town's heart, the more her perception began to shift. The very ground seemed to tremble beneath her feet, not from seismic activity, but from something more intangible, something tied to the weight of forgotten sorrows. Every breath she took became heavier, suffused with the essence of countless lifetimes intertwined with the land. The air became colder, colder than the winter winds that typically swept through the coastal streets. It was a chill that cut deeper than frost. It was a chill that reached her very soul. The fog twisted reality, distorting the familiar into something alien and unsettling. Buildings loomed unnaturally tall or crooked, their windows reflecting fractured, warped visions of the past. Doors creaked open without reason, revealing rooms of dust and decay where the living dared not tread. There were no sounds, no rustling leaves, no distant laughter from children playing. Only the haunting hum of whispers that floated through the mist like ghosts longing to be released from their eternal prison. The town seemed to pulse with life and death simultaneously, caught in a liminal state where time was no longer a linear force but a loop of haunting echoes. The dead were restless, their presence overwhelming. Some were familiar, recognizable in the blurred features of ancestors long past. Fishermen lost at sea, mothers who had never found closure, children whose cries still echoed in the corners of the town. Others were strangers, lost souls from distant eras whose pain seemed to echo with a haunting intensity. They reached out, their ghostly fingers trembling with emotion, searching for something or someone they could no longer touch. Their cries rose from the depths of their despair, a haunting symphony of sorrow and regret that seeped into every pore of the living world. Everywhere she turned, the fog seemed to tighten its grip. The memories it carried were overwhelming, flooding her thoughts with fragmented scenes of death, tragedy, and broken dreams. It was as though the mist itself was feeding off the emotions of the dead, amplifying their suffering and turning it into an oppressive force. There was no escaping it, not by running, not by shouting, not by closing her eyes and hoping for it all to vanish. The fog was a sentient being, a presence that consumed everything in its path and refused to let go. And yet, amidst the despair, there was something strange, a glimmer of recognition. Each spectral figure that emerged from the mist had a story, a reason for returning to this cursed town. They weren't aimless or malevolent. There was a purpose to their haunting. Whether it was unfinished business, unresolved grief, or the need for something long forgotten, they seemed to be searching for something or someone. For a brief moment, Ella wondered if she could help them, if her presence had some small power to ease their suffering. But the weight of their sorrow pressed down on her with such force that it was almost impossible to think. The town was no longer just a place. It had become a living, breathing entity consumed by its past. The dead were inescapable, and their influence was unyielding. The fog wasn't just a boundary, it was a force of nature. A force that would remain long after the living had gone, feeding on the echoes of their existence and keeping the past alive in haunting detail. Ella knew then, as the mist thickened further and the whispers grew louder, that the dead would never truly rest. They were bound to this place, and as long as the fog persisted, they would continue to haunt Harbor's Edge, weaving their sorrow into the very fabric of the town's soul. And in that realization, she understood her own fate was tied to theirs. A captive in a world where the dead ruled, and the living were mere bystanders in a tragic, never-ending tale. "They're not like they used to be," whispered her grandfather, old Amos, as they huddled in his wooden cabin. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. His hands trembled as he clutched a steaming mug of tea, and his eyes, usually warm and full of stories, were wide with something more than fear, something ancient and sorrowful. His voice was low, strained, as if even speaking the words aloud was dangerous. "They remember things," he continued, his gaze locked on the dancing flames. "Things they shouldn't." Ella sat quietly, her own heart thumping in her chest. The cabin was small, filled with the scent of aged wood and the warmth of familiarity, but tonight, it felt like a fragile cocoon in the midst of a waking nightmare. She had heard the stories before, the tales of the dead returning to Harbor's Edge, but hearing them spoken so plainly by old Amos struck a chill deep into her soul. "They speak now," he whispered, his voice nearly a breath. "Not just the cries and the whispers. They speak. They ask. They demand." A shiver ran down Ella's spine as she thought about the ghostly figures that had haunted her visions earlier that evening. Shadows that knew too much, their hollow eyes peering into memories she couldn't control. "What do they want?" she asked softly, though the question felt futile. Old Amos shook his head slowly. "They don't know. Not fully. But they want something. They're searching, reaching for answers that were never given. And they'll take what they need, no matter the cost." The room fell into a heavy silence again. Outside, the fog had thickened, creeping closer to the cabin walls. The whispers of the dead could be heard through the thin walls, low, sorrowful voices that seemed to beckon from beyond the veil. Old Amos' hands tightened around the mug, his knuckles turning white. "They're not here to rest," he finally said, his voice trembling with a mixture of sadness and horror. "They're here to stay." Ella's breath hitched, a knot forming in her throat. She had always believed in the ghost stories, in the myths passed down through generations. But facing the reality of it, seeing the anguish in her grandfather's eyes, made the truth unbearable. The dead weren't merely lingering. They were waking, taking form, and demanding to be acknowledged. "What do we do?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Old Amos looked at her with a gaze heavy with knowledge and regret. "You can't fight them. You can't run from them. All we can do is wait. Wait for them to finish whatever it is they've come for." The weight of his words hung between them, suffocating in its inevitability. The fire flickered again, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls, and for a moment, it felt as though the dead were watching from the other side of the flames, their longing gaze fixed on the living. "We're bound to them now," old Amos said solemnly, his voice barely audible over the increasing wails outside. "There's no escape." Ella closed her eyes, the flicker of the fire burning images into her mind. Memories of faces she couldn't forget, stories she couldn't ignore. The fog was growing restless, and with it, the dead were awakening, demanding answers from a world that had long forgotten them. This extended version emphasizes the haunting atmosphere and the sense of inevitability that Ella and old Amos feel as the dead encroach upon their reality. Ella leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the rough-hewn table between them. The old cabin creaked with every gust of wind, a reminder of its age and its defiance against the years. Her grandfather, old Amos, sat across from her, his pipe held loosely in his weathered hand. The lantern light danced in his eyes, but there was no warmth there, only shadows and the weight of a truth too heavy to ignore. "Why now?" Ella repeated, her voice trembling but determined. Her heart thudded in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears. After all these years, why is it happening now? Amos didn't answer immediately. Instead, he set his pipe down carefully, the clink of the stem against the wood unervingly loud in the silence. His gnarled fingers tapped a slow, deliberate rhythm on the table, as though he were measuring out the time before he could speak. "This town," he began finally, his voice low and gravelly, as if dredging up the words took every ounce of strength he had, "was built on more than just land and timber. It was built on promises, broken ones." Ella frowned, her brow furrowing. "Promises? What promises?" Amos shook his head, his expression unreadable. "Not the kind you make to your neighbor or your kin. These were promises made in desperation, bargains struck in shadows." His words sent a shiver down Ella's spine. She wanted to ask more, to press him for details, but the look in his eyes silenced her. There was a depth to his gaze, a haunted look that made her chest tighten. "The town's past wasn't as quiet as we thought," Amos continued, his voice almost a whisper, "and neither was mine." The admission hung in the air like a thundercloud, heavy and foreboding. Ella's stomach twisted. She had always known her grandfather to be a man of few words, but now it seemed those unspoken words had been hiding something far darker than she'd ever imagined. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Amos sighed, leaning back in his chair. The lantern light cast long shadows on his face, deepening the lines etched there by years of toil and regret. "This town has always had its secrets," he said. "But secrets don't stay buried, Ella. Not forever. They have a way of clawing their way back up, demanding to be reckoned with." Ella shivered, glancing toward the small, fog-clouded window. The mist outside seemed thicker now, pressing against the glass like an unwelcome visitor. She thought she saw shapes moving within it, but when she blinked, they were gone. "What kind of secrets?" she pressed, her voice stronger this time, though her hands trembled in her lap. Amos didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, weathered book. Its leather cover was cracked and faded, the corners worn smooth from years of handling. He placed it on the table between them, his hand lingering on it as though it held a weight greater than its size. "This," he said, his voice heavy with meaning, "is part of it." Ella hesitated before reaching for the book. Her fingers brushed the leather, and a strange sensation rippled through her, a chill, as if the very air around her had turned colder. She opened the cover carefully, revealing pages filled with cramped, spidery handwriting. The ink was faded in places, but the words were still legible. "What is this?" she asked, looking up at him. "Records," Amos said simply. "Accounts of things that happened here. Things people would rather forget. But forgetting doesn't make them go away." She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the lines of text. The words were stark and chilling, recounting events that seemed too terrible to be true, unexplained disappearances, strange rituals, whispers of deals struck in the dead of night. "This can't be real," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Amos gave her a long, measured look. "It's real," he said. "Every word of it." Ella's hands shook as she closed the book and set it down. "But why now?" she asked again, her voice tinged with desperation. "Why is this all coming back now?" Amos leaned forward, his gaze intense. Because time doesn't erase what's been done, Ella, he said. It only hides it for a while. But the past, it doesn't stay hidden forever. Especially not when it's tied to blood. Blood, she repeated, her stomach twisting. He nodded. The kind that binds. The kind that curses. This town was built on blood, Ella, on sacrifices and sins that were meant to be forgotten. But the fog, it remembers. It carries the weight of what we've tried to bury, and now it's bringing it back to us. Ella felt the air leave her lungs, her mind spinning with the enormity of his words. The fog, the dead, the stories she had dismissed as myths, they were all connected, tied to a past she had never truly understood. What are we supposed to do? She asked, her voice trembling. Amos shook his head slowly. I don't know, he admitted. But one thing's certain, the dead won't rest until they get what they're owed. And neither will the fog. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them like a shroud. Outside, the fog thickened, pressing closer, its whispers growing louder. Ella could feel it now, a presence just beyond the walls, waiting, watching. And for the first time, she realized that Harbor's Edge was no longer just a town. It was a reckoning. The next morning, Ella ventured into the fog herself, her breath visible in the cold air as she pressed forward into the unknown. The town was eerily silent, its usual bustle replaced with a heavy, oppressive stillness. The streets were cloaked in a swirling mist, and the further she walked, the harder it became to distinguish where the fog ended and her own thoughts began. Shapes moved within the fog, figures of those who had died long ago. They drifted silently, their forms shifting and reforming like shadows caught between dreams and reality. Some were familiar, faces from her family's past, while others were strangers, their features obscured by the haze. The whispers began almost immediately, soft and indistinct at first, like echoes from a distant time, growing louder as if they were emerging from the depths of the fog itself. Ella paused, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to steady her breath, but the air seemed heavier than before, almost suffocating. A figure emerged from the mist, a young boy with hollow eyes and an expression frozen in fear. His translucent hand reached out, brushing against hers, but she felt no physical touch. Yet the sensation was unmistakable, an icy chill that seemed to seep into her very bones. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice shaking. The boy's lips moved, but no sound emerged. His mouth moved silently, as if the fog itself swallowed his words. The silence was deafening, a maddening presence pressing in on her senses. Another figure appeared, this one older, a woman whose posture was burdened with age and sorrow. Her eyes locked onto Ella's, and for a moment, they seemed to pierce through the mist itself. "You shouldn't be here," the woman's voice hissed in a low, haunting tone. "It's not safe." "Why now?" Ella asked, desperation in her voice. "After all this time, why are you here?" The woman shook her head slowly, her features fading slightly as if the very mist was erasing her from existence. "You'll find out soon enough," she murmured, her voice a faint whisper, lost to the shifting fog. Ella pressed on, the weight of the past bearing down on her with every step. The figures continued to emerge, some walking aimlessly, others frozen in moments of anguish or torment. She recognized the outline of a man in a tattered coat, his eyes hollow as though they had seen unspeakable horrors. A child's laughter echoed softly through the mist, but it was a sound devoid of joy, only a haunting echo of something long lost. Her breath caught in her throat as she moved deeper into the fog, the images blurring together until she could no longer tell if she was walking through the past or some dark, twisted vision conjured by the mist itself. The veil between reality and something else entirely was thinning, and for the first time, she wondered if she was truly awake. The air felt heavy, oppressive, pressing against her chest as though the fog itself had a consciousness. It swirled around her in thick, ghostly tendrils, wrapping her in its cold embrace. She could feel the weight of countless stories, of pain and regret that had been buried beneath generations of silence. A hand, icy and solid, gripped her arm, though no one was there. The mist pressed in tighter, and the shadows grew more vivid, swirling around her in a grotesque dance. "Leave," the voices pleaded, their tones desperate and broken. "You don't belong here." But Ella couldn't move. Her feet seemed rooted to the ground as if the mist itself held her in place. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the sights and sounds, but the figures continued to haunt her mind, their sorrow and anguish seeping into her thoughts. When she finally opened her eyes, the fog seemed darker, more suffocating, and the figures were closer than before, watching, waiting. Her breath came in shallow, uneven gasps, each one more labored than the last. The chilling touch of the mist pressed against her skin, colder than the sea itself. I can't escape," she whispered, her voice breaking as tears mixed with the cold air. Suddenly, a voice cut through the haze, deep, commanding, and impossibly familiar. "You must wake up, child," it said, cutting through the other whispers and cries. "Your time is not yet over." The fog began to retreat, pulling back reluctantly as though it could sense her struggle. The figures faded one by one, their wails and cries diminishing until silence returned. Ella fell to her knees, her hands trembling as she tried to breathe through the overwhelming fear. When she looked up, the sun had finally begun to rise, its light barely breaking through the remaining mist. The town lay still once more, but the memory of the dead lingered, haunting, waiting. And in her heart, she knew the fog would return. But these weren't mindless ghouls or monsters. They spoke, their voices hollow but weighted with truths that had been buried deep in the town's history. Each word they uttered cut through the fog like a blade, piercing the veil between past and present. "We were forgotten," one voice said, her breath shimmering like smoke, curling into the mist around her. "Now we remind them." Her voice was quiet, almost sorrowful, yet it carried an unmistakable resolve, as though the very weight of centuries rested on her words. Another figure, this one a man with sunken eyes and a voice like broken glass, spoke next. "They built over us, trampled our memories, and ignored the truth beneath their feet." His words echoed, weaving through the dense fog, creating a haunting symphony of loss and anguish. "We've been here longer than their houses," another murmured, her voice tremulous yet steady. "Longer than their stories. Long enough to know that they cannot forget what they don't understand." Her voice trembled, but her presence was undeniable, a reminder of the forgotten souls who refused to be silenced. The fog around them pulsed with every word, shifting and swirling in response to their emotions. The dead weren't angry, at least not entirely. There was a deep, aching sorrow beneath their hollow voices, a longing for recognition that had been lost in time. "We remember," a child's voice chimed in, innocent yet haunting, like a whisper from a world long past. "Every child they lost, every secret they buried. We hold them, even if they refuse to see." The figures stood together, their forms blending with the mist, forming an unsettling tableau of voices from beyond the grave. Each one carried the weight of forgotten tragedies, of lives stolen by the very fabric of history that had erased them from memory. "You cannot run from the truth," another voice said, calm yet commanding. "You may try to ignore us, but we will always be here, waiting in the edges of your minds, in the corners of your towns, in the depths of your hearts." Ella felt their presence press against her, a tidal wave of memories and emotions from a time long past. They weren't angry spirits seeking revenge, but the echoes of a forgotten past demanding acknowledgement. Their words were a reminder that history never truly dies. It lingers, haunting those who dare forget it. As the mist thickened and the figures merged into the swirling haze, their voices faded, yet the weight of their truths remained, imprinted on the very air she breathed. The fog continued to shift around her, but their words echoed in her mind long after they had disappeared into the mist. As the fog thickened, the town began to unravel at its very core. Secrets long buried beneath layers of time rose to the surface, twisting and contorting the reality that once felt so stable. Betrayals, lost loves, and unsolved mysteries emerged from the shadows, forcing the town to confront the darkness that had been kept hidden for centuries. The dead weren't merely returning, they were demanding justice, forcing the living to acknowledge their existence, and revealing the depths of a history that had been stifled for far too long. Every step through the mist felt heavier, as though the very weight of forgotten pain pressed down upon her. The air was thick with the echoes of past lives, a cacophony of whispered regrets, cries for justice, and the haunting remnants of love lost. There was no escaping the truth. Every corner she turned, every familiar path she walked, revealed another story, another ghost, reaching out from the fog, demanding attention. The town was no longer just a place of residence. It had become a stage for the forgotten, a place where the dead refused to remain silent. The streets, once busy with life and laughter, now seemed eerily deserted, consumed by the oppressive, swirling mist that carried the weight of centuries. Each home, once a sanctuary, had become a vessel for echoes. Memories held within its walls seeping through cracks and crevices like restless spirits unable to find peace. "Do you hear them?" A voice rasped, cutting through the mist with a haunting clarity. It wasn't just one voice, it was many, overlapping and weaving together in a symphony of sorrow and vengeance. "They speak through us. They tell the stories that no one else dares to remember." The dead weren't mindless specters. They were more than just shadows of the past. They were living fragments of untold truths, breathing life into the forgotten tales they embodied. Each voice, though hollow and distant, carried the weight of lost lives, the weight of pain and injustice that had been locked away in history's deepest recesses. "We died, and they left us behind," came a hollow whisper, its tone sharp with resentment. "But we've never truly been gone." The fog itself seemed to pulse, a living entity entwined with the memories of those who had once walked the streets in life. It twisted and shifted with every whispered word, expanding and contracting like an unseen force that enveloped the town in its grip. The dead didn't need to walk among them. They simply existed in the very air they breathed, in the pulse of the fog itself. "We are the ones they failed to bury," another voice murmured, the words dissolving into the mist like smoke slipping through clenched fingers. "They thought we could be forgotten, thought they could erase us with time. But time never truly forgets. It only compacts the pain, molds it, reshapes it until it becomes something more powerful." Amos, sitting silently in his wooden cabin, watched as the mist crept closer, its tendrils reaching toward the door as if desperate to pull him into its depths. His hands trembled against the worn wooden table, eyes wide with fear and understanding. "They're not lost," he said, his voice strained with the weight of his years. "They're waiting, watching, and we've made them restless." The dead didn't haunt in isolation. They were a collective force, a unified reminder of the town's darkest moments. From the fisherman who drowned in a tempest, his body never found, to the lovers who had met in secret and vanished without a trace, their stories were intertwined in a web of sorrow too vast to untangle. The mist carried these tales, weaving them together with unyielding determination, pulling the living into the depths of their own collective guilt. "This is our reckoning," a voice said, its tone firm and unyielding. "Every truth they buried is rising from the fog. Every lie they told, every shadow they cast. It's coming back." The figures within the mist were no longer fleeting illusions. They solidified into the form of real, living memories. An old woman's face, weathered by grief and time, her hands clasped in prayer. A child, his small frame barely visible, his laughter echoing through the fog like the faintest bell tolling for the dead. Voices swirled together, each one bringing forth more pain, more history, as if the fog itself were an amplifier for the anguish that had been buried beneath generations of denial. "They built their futures on lies," one voice choked out. "And now they'll reap what they've sown." Every word felt like a dagger through the heart, each phrase unraveling the thin veneer of civility that the town had clung to for so long. The dead weren't merely a threat, they were a consequence, the inevitable outcome of a society that chose silence over truth. The fog thickened, and with it, so did the weight of the stories being told. As the town's very existence trembled beneath the weight of the past, Ella knew there was no going back. The dead weren't just memories, they were a force to be reckoned with, a relentless tide of justice demanding the attention of the living. And no matter how hard they tried to resist, the fog would never lift until they faced the truths they had long since buried. "Why are you here?" Ella asked, her voice barely a whisper, trembling with a mixture of awe and fear as she stood in the midst of the thickening fog. The young girl before her, a spirit lost in time, shimmered softly, her form ethereal and ghostly. Decades had passed since her death, and yet here she was, standing with an unshakable determination that defied the boundaries of life and death. Her eyes were wide, filled with both sorrow and purpose, reflecting a depth of emotion that pierced through the haze of the moment. "To find him," the ghost whispered, her breath a thin wisp of smoke drifting into the fog. "To finish what we started." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Ella felt her pulse quicken, her heart thudding against her ribs. She had always been drawn to the mysteries of Harbor's Edge, but nothing had prepared her for this, the weight of history manifesting itself in the form of the dead, and the solemn task they carried. The girl's pale lips moved slowly, her voice steady despite the ethereal tremor beneath it. "He doesn't know, does he?" she asked, her gaze locking onto Ella's, seeking an answer from someone still tethered to the world of the living. He never remembers. Ella shook her head gently, her own confusion mirrored in the girl's spectral eyes. No, he's never spoken of it. He never talks about that night. The ghost's expression darkened, her fragile, translucent figure flickering slightly as though the weight of her mission threatened to pull her further into the void. We fought for him, she said softly, her voice barely a breath against the encroaching fog. We made promises we couldn't break. But now, they've erased us. Erased what we did. The bitterness in her voice was palpable, a sadness that echoed through every syllable. For centuries, the town had strived to move forward, building a facade of progress and prosperity, but beneath the surface lay the lingering shadows of betrayal, loss, and forgotten deeds. The fog that clung to the town wasn't merely an atmospheric phenomenon. It was a manifestation of suppressed memories, of truths long buried and sacrifices left unacknowledged. We sacrificed everything, the ghost continued, her voice rising slightly, filled with a fierce, haunting conviction. Families, dreams, futures. All to protect him. Her gaze softened momentarily, the weight of her emotions almost overwhelming in its intensity. And now, we're ghosts. Forgotten, cast aside like shadows in the corners of memory. Ella's breath hitched, and for a moment, she felt as though she might drown in the overwhelming weight of the story. The girl had been more than just a casualty of time. She had been a guardian, a protector, and the very essence of love woven into duty. Her return was not merely a quest for closure, it was a desperate plea for acknowledgement, a final attempt to bridge the chasm between life and death. We had a pact, the ghost said, her voice trembling with emotion. We promised him safety. We promised him a future. And now, we'll do whatever it takes to fulfill that promise, even if it means breaking the boundaries of what's real. Ella's heart ached with the weight of the girl's resolve. She had heard the stories of shipwrecks and lost souls, but nothing could prepare her for the living embodiment of sorrow that stood before her, a memory fighting to reclaim its place in the living world. But why now? Ella questioned, her voice trembling. Why return after all this time? The ghost's eyes glimmered with a mixture of resolve and desperation. Because they've tried to erase us. They've built their lives over our sacrifice, pretending we never existed. But we won't let them forget. Not anymore. Her voice rose slightly, the haunting melody of her sorrow becoming clearer with each word. He's still alive. And he deserves to know. He deserves to remember. A fierce, protective love emanated from her, a force that surpassed the boundaries of time and death. It was not just the yearning for justice, it was the unyielding need to ensure that history wasn't forgotten, that the weight of their actions, no matter how long ago, did not dissipate like the fog. He doesn't remember, Ella repeated quietly, her voice shaking. He's lived his whole life without knowing what you did for him. The ghost's smile was tender yet haunted, a fragile expression on her ghostly face. He will, she said firmly, her tone resolute. One day, he'll remember. And when he does, the fog will lift, and we will finally be free. The fog shifted around them, thick and consuming, a swirling, living entity that seemed to hold the weight of centuries of pain and loss. Yet within that suffocating haze, a flicker of hope burned, a promise that even the dead could not be silenced if the living were willing to hear them. We'll wait for him, the ghost whispered, her voice fading as her form began to waver, her essence blending with the mist. As long as it takes. Ella watched her vanish into the ever-deepening fog, the silence left behind heavy with the echoes of promises yet to be fulfilled. The town, for all its progress and modernity, still carried its ghosts, those who had sacrificed everything, only to be erased from the pages of history. And as the fog continued to rise, so did their resolve to be remembered. Tommy, Ella's childhood friend, had become one of the living dead. His eyes were hollow, like dark, empty wells reflecting a truth too heavy to contain. His voice, though quiet, resonated with an otherworldly weight that seemed to shake the very foundation of the world around her. The fog doesn't just bring back the dead, he warned her in hushed tones, his breath faint and ghostly, curling into the mist between them. It distills the truth. And the truth? It can tear the town apart. Ella stared at him, her breath caught in her throat, unable to look away. There was a strange beauty in the way he stood there, an unnatural stillness to his movements, yet an unsettling vibrancy to his words. She had known Tommy all her life, But this wasn't the same boy who had once laughed with her by the shore or helped her sneak into the hidden nooks of Harbor's Edge. This was something far more unsettling, a remnant of a past that refused to remain buried. The fog holds memories we weren't meant to remember, he continued, his voice a haunting melody that resonated in the air like distant whispers through ancient woods. Not just ours, but theirs too, the ones who've been forgotten, erased from history. And now, as they return, they bring with them truths long buried beneath the layers of time. Truths that are too painful to face. Ella's fingers gripped the edge of the wooden table in old Amos's cabin, knuckles whitening as the weight of his words pressed upon her. The air inside felt thick with unease, heavy with unspoken fears and unspeakable truths. She had always been curious about the strange happenings in Harbor's Edge, but this wasn't curiosity, it was dread. Deep, consuming dread. The town built itself on lies, Tommy said, his voice a solemn chant. Every family, every street, every home. Every secret had to be hidden, buried beneath layers of half-truths and forgotten sins. The fog doesn't care for those lies. It pulls them from the shadows and exposes them for what they are, deceptions, illusions, and betrayals. His gaze locked onto hers with an intensity that seemed almost unbearable. And when those lies are stripped away, what remains is something far more terrifying. A town without its masks. A people who must face the truth they've been running from for generations. Ella swallowed hard, the knot of unease tightening in her chest. What happens when the truth is too much to bear? She asked softly, her voice quivering as she leaned closer, as though her very weight might dissolve into the fog if she moved too quickly. If the town breaks apart? Tommy gave a slow, mournful shake of his head, his expression a mix of sadness and resignation. It already has, he said, his voice a ghostly sigh. The fog is not just some natural phenomenon, it's a reckoning. A force of nature that has been building beneath the surface, beneath the stones and tides and forgotten histories. It's the culmination of all we've tried to ignore, all we've tried to forget. And when it surges, there's no stopping it. He paused, his breath visible in the chill of the room. Every lie, every betrayal, every secret deed, nothing remains hidden in the fog. It pulls them to the surface, one by one, like dead leaves floating in a stream. His voice grew quieter, almost mournful. The pieces will fall into place, and nothing will remain the same. The room seemed to shrink, suffused with a tense, oppressive silence. The weight of his words hung heavily in the air, filling every corner of the cabin with a sense of inevitability. Harbor's Edge wasn't just a place. Its very soul was unraveling, revealing its true, untamed nature. And as the fog deepened, that reality became impossible to ignore. Tommy's expression softened slightly, though his tone remained grim. Even memories we thought were long gone resurface, he murmured. Things we never spoke of, stories we dismissed as mere legends, they come back to haunt us. Not as shadows, but as living truths. Ella shivered, wrapping her arms tightly around herself as the cabin seemed to close in on her. She understood then, in the deepest part of her being, that this wasn't just about the dead or forgotten. It was about the fragile threads that held the town together, unraveling piece by piece. The fog wasn't just a natural barrier. It was a purging force, stripping away the comfort of denial and leaving behind only the raw, unvarnished reality. And with it came a future that no one could predict. But not everyone welcomed the truth. Some saw the return of the dead as a threat, a disruption to the fragile peace they had fought to maintain. Mayor Green was one of them, a man whose past was as clouded as the fog itself. His hands were drenched in compromise, and his darkest deeds were surfacing through the fog like twisted memories, an ever-present reminder of the secrets he had worked so hard to bury. Every conversation with Mayor Green was a careful dance of words, an attempt to conceal his true intentions beneath a polished exterior. His voice was smooth, his smiles calculated, but beneath it all, there was a tension, an unspoken desperation to hold on to power. As the fog thickened, revealing truths he had hoped to keep hidden, his veneer began to crack. Shadows flickered in his eyes, and moments of uncertainty betrayed his once confident demeanor. The fog disrupts everything, he muttered during a closed-door meeting with the town council, his voice low and strained. We cannot let it expose the past. It will tear this town apart. His words carried an urgency, a sense of fear rooted in the very fabric of his existence. We've worked too hard to keep Harbor's Edge stable, to ensure the balance between tradition and progress. The dead returning. It's chaos. But the council wasn't as easily swayed as they once were. Members questioned his resolve, their eyes narrowing as they peered into the fog that seemed to seep through the windows. Your hands are not clean, Green, one of them, an elderly historian named Clara, said with a sharp edge to her voice. The past is already stirring. You cannot control it anymore. Green's jaw tightened at her words, his fingers drumming against the polished wood of the table. His smile slipped for a fleeting moment, replaced by something colder, something closer to desperation. We've maintained peace by any means necessary, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The fog doesn't care for peace. It only cares about revealing the truth. The other council members murmured in agreement, their collective weight pressing down on Green like a heavy stone. The room felt heavier than it had before, the air thick with tension. The more the fog crept into Harbor's Edge, the less control Green seemed to possess over the narrative. You're holding on to a mirage, Clara continued, her tone sharp, unyielding. Your deals, your compromises, none of them can shield you from what's coming. The dead don't care for politics or power. They seek justice. They seek answers. Green's fists clenched beneath the table, his knuckles whitening against the fabric of his gloves. We can't allow the town to descend into madness, he hissed, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. If the truth gets out, everything we've built will crumble. But even as he spoke, a part of him knew the truth was slipping through his grasp. The fog was relentless, indifferent to his ambitions and fears. It didn't matter how carefully he tried to spin the narrative or how many lies he whispered into the ears of his allies. The dead had their own timeline, and their memories were far more enduring than any scheme he could concoct. Mayor Green's fear wasn't unfounded, it was palpable. His legacy was at stake, and with the return of the dead, the past had become an unstoppable force. The more he resisted, the more his grip on power weakened, leaving him to face the haunting reality that he could no longer control the truth. The nights grew colder, and the fog deeper, but so did the weight of the revelations. Secrets didn't just stay hidden anymore. They surfaced in the most haunting ways, through whispered conversations among the living, through visions shared between those caught in the mist. And as the lines between the past and the present blurred, Mayor Green found himself fighting a battle not just for his position, but for his very sanity. Every step he took to maintain control pushed him deeper into the abyss, where the echoes of the dead were the only thing that seemed real. We have to stop this, Ella said, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. Or the town will destroy itself. Her words hung in the air like a heavy fog, pressing down on everyone around her. The weight of the truth behind those simple words was suffocating. The town, once so vibrant and full of life, was unraveling at an alarming rate. The dead were no longer passive figures confined to the shadows. They were powerful, relentless forces, determined to right the wrongs of the past, and they would stop at nothing to do so. I've seen the way they move, how they watch us, how they whisper among themselves, she continued, her gaze piercing into the anxious faces gathered before her. It's not just a return of spirits seeking peace. They're angry. They're vengeful. And as long as the fog thickens, they will grow stronger. Her voice trembled slightly as she recalled the hollow-eyed figures she had encountered, each with stories too painful to comprehend. Lost families, broken promises, and unspeakable betrayals that had festered through generations. Every moment they spent in the fog was another layer peeled back from the town's darkest past. The more we try to push them away, the harder they fight, Ella said, her hands trembling at her sides. They're not here to haunt us for closure. They want to expose everything we've hidden, everything we've ignored. The townsfolk exchanged uneasy glances, their unease evident in their fidgeting hands and shallow breaths. The line between the living and the dead had blurred, and they knew deep down that silence was no longer an option. The very fabric of their lives was at stake. We can't let them tear this town apart, Ella said again, her voice rising slightly in intensity. If we don't take action, there won't be anything left of Harbor's Edge. No history, no future, just an empty space consumed by regret and sorrow. A heavy silence fell over the room. No one could deny the truth in her words. The town had reached a breaking point, and even the strongest walls could not withstand the weight of such haunting revelations. We have to fight back, Ella added, her voice firm. Not with force, but with truth. We must understand why they've returned, why they're demanding justice. Only then can we hope to bring peace, not for ourselves, but for the dead who still walk among us." The townsfolk nodded slowly, a reluctant understanding settling in their hearts. They knew the risks, the dangers, but also the inevitability. Harbor's Edge could no longer afford to be paralyzed by fear. The dead had spoken, and their voices couldn't be silenced. The town had to rise from the fog or be consumed by it. "But how do we fight them?" someone whispered from the back of the room. "They're not just memories. They're real, present, and relentless. They manipulate the very air we breathe." "It's not easy," Ella admitted, her voice softening with compassion. "But we have to hold on to the truth, no matter how painful or uncomfortable it is. The dead can't hurt us if we face the reality of their pain, of our own mistakes, and the history we've tried to bury." Another man, older and weary, leaned forward. "It's not only about facing the dead. We have to confront the living who have allowed this to happen. Those who turned their backs on the suffering, who ignored the warnings, who made deals in the dark that allowed the darkness to grow." Ella took a deep breath, her mind racing with all they needed to do. "It's not just about confronting the past," she said finally. "It's about reclaiming our town, uniting not just against the dead, but against the complacency and fear that has allowed them to fester for so long. We need strength, not just individually, but together." The room filled with murmurs of agreement, but the task seemed monumental. The fog had settled deep into the roots of Harbor's Edge, entwining itself in every stone, every building, every soul. The dead weren't passive ghosts. They were a force that could not be ignored, and neither could their demands. "If we don't act now," Ella's voice grew quieter, yet more urgent, "we'll lose everything. Our memories, our stories, our very sense of who we are as a town will vanish beneath the weight of their truths." With that, a resolve took hold of the room, a fragile but undeniable strength. The battle for Harbor's Edge wasn't just one against the dead, it was a battle to preserve the essence of the town itself. They had to rise from the fog, or be consumed by it. Together with her friends and allies, the living and the dead, Ella forged a plan. The fog, they discovered, was connected to an ancient artifact hidden beneath the town's chapel. A source of power that could bind or unleash the dead's secrets, its origins lost in the pages of history long forgotten. As they delved deeper into the mysteries surrounding the artifact, they realized its true purpose was far more complex than just controlling the fog. It was a conduit for memories, both forgotten and repressed. Every truth the town had suppressed over the centuries seeped through its power, manifesting as restless spirits and haunting apparitions. The artifact held the power to awaken the dead, but also to reveal the darkest chapters of the town's past, those buried beneath the weight of time and silence. Amos, with his decades of wisdom and experience, knew the risks they were taking. "We don't control the fog," he said grimly. "We endure it. And we listen." His voice was laced with somber conviction, his eyes filled with memories of a past he could barely comprehend, let alone forget. Every echo of the past was embedded in the fabric of the town, woven into its very soil and stones. The artifact, he explained, was not just a tool, it was a key to unlocking the deepest, most buried memories of the town's history. It was both a blessing and a curse, a gateway to truths that had been intentionally forgotten in favor of peace, or perhaps ignorance. Listening to the fog wasn't a passive act. It required patience, an openness to the haunting whispers that drifted through the mist. Every story, every anguished cry, was a piece of the town's history that refused to remain hidden. Amos understood that to defeat the fog, they couldn't simply wish it away, they had to face the truth it carried. "The artifact is more than just a tool," he continued, his tone heavy with caution. "It's a mirror to our sins, a vessel that holds all the regret and guilt we've buried. If we don't acknowledge what it shows us, we'll only fuel its power." Ella's heart pounded in her chest as she grasped the weight of his words. The idea of listening to the fog meant confronting painful memories, unearthing truths that had been pushed aside for generations. But to ignore it was to invite the darkness back into the town with even more ferocity. "The dead don't just want to haunt us," she whispered, her voice steady yet fragile. "They want to be heard. They want justice for the wrongs we've done. We owe them that much." Her allies, both the living and the spirits, nodded in agreement. They understood that the artifact wasn't just a means to control the fog, It was a gateway to understanding and perhaps redemption. Yet, with each step toward unraveling its mysteries, the risk grew. The artifact's power could consume those who wielded it if they weren't careful, turning them into vessels for the very darkness they sought to banish. "Endure," Amos repeated, his voice a solemn mantra. "And listen. Only then can we hope to free the town from its chains." Together, they pressed forward into the depths of Harbor's Edge's haunted history, driven by a shared resolve to restore peace, no matter how steep the cost. The fog may never fully dissipate, but in its embrace, they would find the courage to confront the truths that defined them, and perhaps, reclaim the town's very soul. In a final confrontation beneath the mist, Ella faced Mayor Green. The truth hung thick in the air as the dead surrounded them, their faces etched with sorrow and anger. Every lie, every secret came alive in the fog, and the weight was unbearable. The once clear distinction between reality and the supernatural blurred into a single, oppressive force, suffocating the air around them. Each breath felt heavier, laden with the memories of those long lost and the pain of the wrongs that had gone unaddressed for so long. Shadows flickered around them, weaving a tapestry of grief and regret, pulling them deeper into the haunting truth. The dead moved slowly, their forms shimmering in and out of focus, their hollow eyes locked onto Mayor Green with an intensity that made him tremble. Every step he took back was met with their silent judgment, their unresolved pain radiating outward like an invisible wave that shook the very foundations of his false authority. His usual stoic facade cracked under the pressure, revealing the desperate man beneath, the one who had clung to power by any means necessary, shielding his past behind a mask of control and order. Every word spoken by the dead was a weight on his soul, a relentless chorus of accusations and unfinished business that refused to be silenced. "You abandoned us," one whispered, her voice sharp and clear. "You left us to die, to be forgotten." Another's voice followed, soft yet cutting deep. "Your lies were the chains we couldn't escape, and now we rise to break them." Green's breathing quickened, his once steady composure shattering under the torrent of haunting truths. His hands, once steady, shook as he struggled to maintain his grip on reality. His gaze flicked between the dead faces, each one holding a different tale of betrayal, a different scar left by his actions. Their voices mixed together, weaving a chorus of condemnation that pressed him further into the pit of his guilt. "You think you can control us from beyond the grave," one of them asked, her voice dripping with bitterness. "You can't. The fog has set us free." The unbearable weight pressed down harder with each passing second, filling the air with an oppressive stillness that was deafening in its silence. Green's heart pounded violently against his chest, his thoughts swirling in a chaotic storm of regret and fear. Every lie he had told, every deal made in the shadows, felt as though they were being dragged into the light of unrelenting judgment. He could no longer deny his crimes, nor the damage they had inflicted on those he had sworn to protect. The dead's presence wasn't just a haunting. They were a force of reckoning, a reckoning Green could no longer escape. Their presence dissolved any illusions of control he once had, leaving him vulnerable and exposed to the raw truth. The fog, once seen as a barrier between the living and the dead, had become the very medium through which justice was being served, harsh and merciless. In the midst of the overwhelming pressure, Ella's voice cut through the chaos once again, steady and resolute. "You've had your time, Mayor Green. Now it's ours." The dead united their energy, creating an overwhelming force that swirled around them, binding the weight of the past to the present. Green could feel it, a crushing, unrelenting power that refused to be silenced. His voice trembled as he attempted to plead, but there was no escape from the tidal wave of truth that engulfed him. His desperate words fell on deaf ears, lost in the collective roar of the dead's final judgment. The mist thickened, but so did the resolve. With every haunting step, the dead pulled the weight of their sorrow, their anger, and their justice forward. Green, consumed by the inevitability of his fate, could only fall silent beneath the relentless onslaught of his own sins, exposed, undone, and powerless against the unyielding tide of the truth. In a final confrontation beneath the mist, Ella faced Mayor Green. The truth hung thick in the air as the dead surrounded them, their faces etched with sorrow and anger. Every lie, every secret came alive in the fog, and the weight was unbearable. The once clear distinction between reality and the supernatural blurred into a single, oppressive force, suffocating the air around them. Each breath felt heavier, laden with the memories of those long lost and the pain of the wrongs that had gone unaddressed for so long. Shadows flickered around them, weaving a tapestry of grief and regret, pulling them deeper into the haunting truth. The dead moved slowly, their forms shimmering in and out of focus, their hollow eyes locked onto Mayor Green with an intensity that made him tremble. Every step he took back was met with their silent judgment, their unresolved pain radiating outward like an invisible wave that shook the very foundations of his false authority. His usual stoic facade cracked under the pressure, revealing the desperate man beneath, the one who had clung to power by any means necessary, shielding his past behind a mask of control and order. Every word spoken by the dead was a weight on his soul, a relentless chorus of accusations and unfinished business that refused to be silenced. "You abandoned us," one whispered her, voice sharp and clear. "You left us to die, to be forgotten." Another's voice followed, soft yet cutting deep. "Your lies were the chains we couldn't escape, and now we rise to break them." Green's breathing quickened, his once steady composure shattering under the torrent of haunting truths. His hands, once steady, shook as he struggled to maintain his grip on reality. His gaze flicked between the dead faces, each one holding a different tale of betrayal, a different scar left by his actions. Their voices mixed together, weaving a chorus of condemnation that pressed him further into the pit of his guilt. "You think you can control us from beyond the grave," one of them asked, her voice dripping with bitterness. "You can't. The fog has set us free." The unbearable weight pressed down harder with each passing second, filling the air with an oppressive stillness that was deafening in its silence. Green's heart pounded violently against his chest, his thoughts swirling in a chaotic storm of regret and fear. Every lie he had told, every deal made in the shadows, felt as though they were being dragged into the light of unrelenting judgment. He could no longer deny his crimes, nor the damage they had inflicted on those he had sworn to protect. The dead's presence wasn't just a haunting. They were a force of reckoning, a reckoning Green could no longer escape. Their presence dissolved any illusions of control he once had, leaving him vulnerable and exposed to the raw truth. The fog, once seen as a barrier between the living and the dead, had become the very medium through which justice was being served, harsh and merciless. In the midst of the overwhelming pressure, Ella's voice cut through the chaos once again, steady and resolute. "You've had your time, Mayor Green. Now it's ours." The dead united their energy, creating an overwhelming force that swirled around them, binding the weight of the past to the present. Green could feel it, a crushing, unrelenting power that refused to be silenced. His voice trembled as he attempted to plead, but there was no escape from the tidal wave of truth that engulfed him. His desperate words fell on deaf ears, lost in the collective roar of the dead's final judgment. The mist thickened, but so did the resolve. With every haunting step, the dead pulled the weight of their sorrow, their anger, and their justice forward. Green, consumed by the inevitability of his fate, could only fall silent beneath the relentless onslaught of his own sins, exposed, undone, and powerless against the unyielding tide of the truth. "End it," Tommy whispered from behind her. His voice was faint, but his eyes held the wisdom of the ages, a depth of understanding that spoke of countless lifetimes lived through pain and sorrow. The weight of his gaze anchored Ella in the moment, grounding her amidst the chaos and uncertainty. She took a deep breath, her lungs filling with the damp, ghostly air, while her heart pounded in sync with the pulse of the thick, oppressive fog surrounding them. The dead will rest once their stories are heard, not buried. "Heard," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath the surface. Every word felt like a piece of her being laid bare, a recognition of the truth they had all been avoiding for too long. The ghosts, once lost to the shadows of forgotten memories, now surged forward with voices that needed to be acknowledged, a chorus of untold histories and unrelenting grief. Tommy's gaze shifted, his expression a blend of sorrow and resolve, as if he understood that their actions were more than just a battle against the supernatural. They were a confrontation with a deeper, more profound reality. The artifact she held crackled in her hands, its ancient power humming like a living thing, connected to the very essence of the town's buried history. It pulsed with energy, each tremor sending ripples of energy through the air, stirring the memories of those who had been wronged, neglected, or lost to the annals of time. The fog that had once engulfed them began to shift, no longer a suffocating barrier, but a restless entity yearning for release. The thick mist twisted and writhed, its form twisting into fleeting shapes that flickered in and out of existence, a ghostly dance of sorrow and redemption. Voices rose from the shadows, intertwining with the crackling artifact's hum, weaving a tapestry of forgotten tales and unspoken truths. With every breath Ella took, the weight of the fog seemed to lift, a slow and deliberate release of the past's heavy burden. The dead, once trapped in a cycle of haunting silence, were finally allowed to speak, to reclaim the narratives they had been denied. Tommy's whispered encouragement became a guiding force, an echo of hope amidst the disarray, urging her to complete the ritual, to shatter the artifact and set the dead free. The artifact shattered in her hands, its fragments scattering like fragile glass across the uneven ground. In that moment, the fog began to lift, first in small, hesitant wisps, then in a steady retreat. The oppressive pall that had smothered the town lifted into nothingness, leaving only the memory of its weight behind. The dead faded from view, their voices fading into the air like the last whispers of a forgotten dream. What remained was a quiet stillness, an eerie calm that spoke of closure and renewal. The town that had once been a place of secrets and shadows now stood with a newfound clarity, its stories no longer buried beneath the mist but embraced within its heart. Tommy's faint smile lingered as he disappeared into the ether, his purpose fulfilled, his legacy preserved in the memories of those who had witnessed the dawn of a new era. When the sun rose again, Harbor's Edge was changed. The village, once cloaked in mystery and dread, now stood bathed in the soft light of a new dawn, a fragile yet undeniable transformation. The dead were gone, their physical presence dissolved into the void they had come from, but their echoes lingered. The veil of secrecy that had held the town captive for generations had been lifted, revealing a truth that had long been suppressed beneath layers of fear and denial. The streets were quieter now, but not empty. There was a stillness, a reflective quiet, where memories seemed to hum just beneath the surface, like a whisper in the breeze. The townspeople moved cautiously at first, unsure of how to navigate this newfound openness, but slowly, they began to speak freely of what they had seen and heard in the fog. Every shadow cast on the cobblestone seemed imbued with the weight of forgotten tales, yet now these tales were shared, cherished, even healed. No longer haunted by the dead's sorrowful specters, the living were free to confront their own pasts, to reconcile with the truths they had long avoided. Harbor's Edge became a place of remembrance and reconciliation, a town where silence no longer protected secrets, but where stories were embraced, regardless of how painful or beautiful they might be. The fog, too, had changed. Once a force of confusion and despair, it had been transformed into something gentler, a mist that drifted over the hills and crept around the edges of memories, not to conceal them, but to softly cradle them. In its absence, the weight of isolation had lifted, and with it, the people of Harbor's Edge found strength in unity, in the shared understanding that truth, no matter how painful, could bring healing. The echoes of the dead weren't a burden but a legacy. Reminders that even the most sorrowful stories had value, that facing the past could free the heart to embrace the present and future. The cracks in the town's foundation, once fractures of deceit and pain, had been smoothed over by the clarity that came from confronting reality. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, illuminating the newly purified town, a sense of peace settled over Harbor's Edge. A peace born from the power of truth, the courage to endure the darkness, and the resilience to emerge stronger on the other side. The echoes of the dead had been silenced, but their message lived on, a testament to the enduring strength of human connection and the boundless potential for renewal. "The fog will return," Amos said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "But so will we, to listen." The townspeople murmured softly, their voices a blend of hope and caution, recognizing the truth in Amos's words. They understood that the fog, while a source of fear, was also a part of their heritage, a reminder of the unseen forces that shaped their lives. And though they had emerged from the depths of darkness, they knew that the town's journey was far from over. In the quiet moments between the bustling of daily life, whispers of the past would resurface. Stories passed down in hushed tones, memories of the dead returning not to haunt, but to reveal. Harbor's Edge had become a place of paradox, a sanctuary where sorrow intertwined with resilience, where ghosts walked not to torment, but to teach. The community took to heart the lessons of the fog, knowing that their survival depended not just on erasing the past, but honoring it. They rebuilt the foundations of trust, weaving together fractured relationships with threads of understanding and empathy. The town square, once a gathering place of fear and secrecy, became a hub of shared experiences, a place where honesty and vulnerability were met with support rather than rejection. Each person carried the weight of their own truths, acknowledging the complexities of their existence in the tapestry of Harbor's Edge. The dead had revealed the darkest recesses of their history, but in doing so, had also illuminated paths toward healing. The fog may return, but the town had grown strong enough to face it together, a community resilient and unyielding. Amos's words echoed through the streets as a promise, one that resonated with a new sense of purpose. They stood not as victims of the past, but as guardians of their future, ready to listen, to endure, and to grow. And so, the coastal town of Harbor's Edge continued its haunting yet harmonious existence. Haunted, yet whole, bound by the understanding that their greatest strength lay in embracing both the light and the shadows that had come to define them. Horror story number 2. In the quiet town of Whisper Hollow, where the whispers of forgotten secrets seemed to echo through the narrow streets, weaving a tapestry of mystery and history, Leo arrived. The town, shrouded in a timeless stillness, held onto its stories like an old photograph clinging to faded memories. Shadows stretched long and dark against the cobblestone paths, casting an almost haunting beauty over the landscape. The scent of aged wood and damp earth hung in the air, a constant reminder of the past, an atmosphere thick with whispers of tales long forgotten. Leo's steps were measured, deliberate, as he emerged from the train station, his worn suitcase clutched tightly in one hand. It was a simple suitcase, scuffed and faded, yet within it lay a promise of laughter, of wonder, and of stories that came alive in the hearts of those who dared to listen. Whisper Hollow seemed to hold its breath as he moved through the town square, his presence barely a whisper against the backdrop of ancient buildings that seemed to watch him with knowing eyes. The townsfolk moved with a slow, contemplative pace, each glance directed toward Leo as though they were measuring his intentions, searching for the truth behind his arrival. The children gathered first, their small hands clutching at the hems of their parents' skirts, wide eyes watching the unfolding mystery of the man with the suitcase. Leo's fingers moved with practiced ease, unlocking the case with a soft click. As the lid lifted, a sense of anticipation rippled through the crowd, as though the very air had shifted. From the suitcase emerged a puppet, a handcrafted marionette, its wooden frame painted with intricate detail. The puppet had a face carved with gentle, almost lifelike expressions, features that seemed to mirror the town's longing for connection. The marionette's glass eyes shimmered under the dimming light, filled with an almost supernatural life. A small smile tugged at Leo's lips as he raised the puppet, and with a gentle breath, the puppet's story began. The children leaned in, their breath caught between wonder and disbelief, while the adults watched with a quiet reverence. Leo's voice carried a warmth and a story-like cadence that pulled everyone into a world of fantasy and magic. The puppet danced gracefully, moving as if guided not by strings but by an unseen force, a force that spoke directly to the hearts of the audience. Tales of heroes and villains, of forgotten kingdoms and enchanted forests, filled the air. Each word from Leo's lips painted vivid landscapes and emotional journeys, connecting deeply with the audience. The crowd was no longer merely observing, they were part of the story. The old whispers of Whisper Hollow seemed to merge with the new narratives being spun. Laughter bubbled from children's mouths, weaving through the still air like ribbons of light. Adults found themselves smiling, their burdens momentarily lifted by the enchanting world that Leo created. The town's history and secrets, which had once felt heavy and oppressive, now seemed to dissolve, replaced by hope and the magic of possibility. As the evening deepened, the shadows softened, their edges blurred into a gentle embrace. Whisper Hollow had never felt more alive, more whole. The streets, once cloaked in quiet, were filled with the echoes of stories. Every puppet, every movement, was a breath of fresh air into the heart of the town. And as Leo packed his suitcase once more, the townsfolk followed him with their eyes, not wanting the magic to end, but knowing that in their hearts, the stories would never truly be forgotten. The whispers would continue, carried forward by laughter, imagination, and the simple power of shared moments. A letter awaited him, the delicate paper whispering secrets between its folds, its edges frayed with age as though it had traveled through time itself. Delivered by an unfamiliar hand, the handwriting was elegant yet unsettling, each stroke of the pen holding a weight beyond simple ink and paper. The seal was simple but meaningful, a faint wax imprint of a rose, its petals imperfectly shaped, as though molded by the ghostly touch of unseen hands. Leo's fingers trembled as he slowly unfolded it, the crisp parchment unfolding to reveal words that seemed to pulse with a quiet urgency. Dear Leo, I have watched you from afar, admired your work, and seen the way your puppetry brings joy to the hearts of those who listen. There is a piece of history I believe you must possess, a gift that holds more than just craftsmanship. Felix has waited long enough, and now it is time for his story to continue. With quiet respect, a mysterious benefactor asterisk. Leo's breath caught in his throat. Felix. The name sent a shiver down his spine, a flicker of something ancient stirring deep within him. He had heard whispers of Felix, a name known to a select few in Whisper Hollow, a marionette carved from wood long before his time. Some spoke of a simple figure, lifelike yet static, a relic of forgotten artistry. Others spoke in hushed tones of a darker legend, a puppet imbued with something more than mere craftsmanship, a vessel for emotions long lost, a bridge to the depths of the subconscious. What intrigued Leo the most was not just the offer of a marionette, but the way the letter seemed to pull him into a world far beyond the boundaries of mere puppetry. Felix wasn't simply a puppet. He was a key, a vessel for stories untold and emotions buried deep beneath layers of time. To bring Felix to life was more than an artistic challenge. It was a journey into the very soul of creation itself, a journey that would test his limits, both creative and personal. With every word, the letter painted a picture of something larger, something ethereal, something that blurred the line between reality and imagination. The weight of history pressed against Leo's chest, each sentence unraveling a tapestry of forgotten tales and emotions that seemed to pulse through the very fibers of Whisper Hollow. His mind raced, torn between the excitement of bringing such a legendary figure to life and the gnawing sense of caution that came with walking so close to the unknown. Yet, beneath his apprehension, a deeper, more compelling force emerged, a curiosity that burned like a flame. Felix had waited for generations, locked away in obscurity, his story silenced by the passage of time. Now, the letter felt like a summons, pulling Leo towards something extraordinary. The thought of breathing life into this ancient figure was intoxicating. A possibility that stretched beyond the limits of his craft, beyond the simple confines of storytelling, into something mystical, almost haunting. As he carefully refolded the letter, his fingers lingering over the wax seal, Leo felt an odd sense of destiny. The marionette wasn't just a relic, it was a doorway, a conduit to forgotten dreams, buried fears, and lost memories. The letter didn't just ask him to create, it beckoned him to awaken a story that had long been waiting for its moment to be told. Leo had heard whispers of the cursed marionette, a puppet with a history deeper than the town's oldest oak trees. The tales spoke of Felix as more than just a simple figure carved from wood. He was a vessel for something ancient, something that refused to be confined by time or memory. Legends of lost souls trapped within his gaze and emotions etched into his very movements filled the air with an eerie stillness. Whispers told of performances where laughter abruptly turned to terror, where joy became sorrow, and where Felix seemed to move as though guided by unseen hands. Yet, despite the chilling tales and the warnings that had followed him like shadows, something about the letter spoke to Leo on a deeper level. It wasn't just the allure of a forgotten story or the challenge of awakening a lifeless figure. No, it was the melody woven into the words, a haunting tune sung in a forgotten tongue, stirring something deep within his soul. The letter was not merely an invitation, it was a summons, a call to embrace the unknown and face the dark corners of creativity that few dared to venture into. He accepted the gift, not out of reckless ambition, but because the pull was undeniable. There was a sense that Felix wasn't just a marionette, but a gateway, a bridge to something that transcended the surface of reality. Every tale he had heard, every ominous warning, seemed to fade into the background as he carefully gathered the pieces of Felix from the depths of the mysterious benefactor's instructions. Each intricate detail, the chipped wooden frame, the fraying strings, the hollow eyes, felt as though they had been preserved not by craftsmanship alone, but by the weight of countless emotions woven into every fiber. As he cradled the marionette in his hands, the stillness of the room thickened. Felix felt heavier than his wooden form suggested, as though the energy of forgotten emotions radiated through him, seeping into Leo's very being. The lines between creator and creation blurred, and for a moment, it felt as if Felix had already begun to awaken. The weight of history, the haunting tales, and the mysterious letter, all combined into a symphony of expectation that left Leo breathless and captivated. He knew the risks. There was a chance he might unleash something darker than he could control. Yet, in accepting the gift, he felt a sense of purpose, as though this was the next step in his journey as a storyteller and creator. Felix wasn't just a puppet, he was the embodiment of a forgotten legacy, a chance to breathe life into something that had been silenced for too long. And so, with a quiet resolve, Leo took his first steps toward awakening the cursed marionette, knowing full well that the path ahead would be far from ordinary. "Welcome to Whisper Hollow, Leo," the voice in the letter had said. "Felix will tell you stories, stories that the town has long since forgotten." The words lingered in his mind, each syllable resonating with a haunting weight. Leo had no idea what he was walking into, but an undeniable curiosity pulled him forward. The calm of the town square seemed almost deceptive, masking a deeper, darker undercurrent beneath its surface. Whisper Hollow wasn't merely a quiet place, it was a repository of secrets, a place where history wasn't just remembered, it was alive. Every step he took felt as though he was being drawn closer to the edge of something far beyond comprehension, something that blurred the line between reality and the otherworldly. Felix had been more than a puppet, he was a relic of a forgotten age, a vessel for memories and emotions long buried. The letter spoke of stories long lost, but what kind of stories? Tales of sorrow, regret, joy, or perhaps something far more sinister. Leo's mind raced as he envisioned the townsfolk, their expressions etched with unease, whispering about Felix when the shadows stretched long into the night. Was the marionette a key to unlocking the town's buried past, or something far darker? Something that had been intentionally forgotten for good reason? The letter had mentioned stories, but not in the way one might expect. These weren't simple fables meant for children or the nostalgic recollections of old men by the fire. They were stories of lives once lived, of dreams once pursued, and of pain endured through generations. Whisper Hollow wasn't just a backdrop, it was the very stage for these forgotten tales, and Felix was the storyteller, guiding the narrative with movements that seemed to transcend the boundaries of lifeless wood. Leo felt a shiver creep down his spine as he imagined the weight of those stories pressing against him, each forgotten chapter waiting to be unearthed. The townsfolk's quiet gazes seemed to echo these very thoughts, an understanding that the past wasn't just history, it was a living, breathing entity. With every creak of the wooden floor beneath his feet, Leo began to feel a deeper sense of inevitability. There was no turning back. Whatever awaited him was a journey into the unknown, where truth and fiction blurred, and where the line between creation and discovery disappeared entirely. At first, Felix seemed like any other marionette, silent, lifeless, resting in the dim light of Leo's workshop. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, the faint rustling of fabric, and the hum of forgotten memories hanging in the shadows. The workshop was a space of meticulous craftsmanship, but Felix sat at its center like an enigma waiting to be unraveled. His wooden frame, though intricately carved, seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, as if the very essence of his being drew energy from the darkness around him. Leo spent endless nights studying him, his hands moving carefully, adjusting the strings, exploring the seams that connected Felix's movements to his own intentions. Yet, despite his best efforts, Felix remained motionless, his expression fixed in a haunting stillness that seemed almost defiant. But as nights stretched longer and the town outside grew quieter, things began to shift. At first, the changes were so subtle that they could have been dismissed as imagination. A slight twitch of a finger, the faintest tilt of his head, or a shadow that seemed to move without cause. Leo would glance up from his work, convinced the dim candlelight had played tricks on his mind, only to find Felix in a different position when he turned back. It was as though the marionette had been waiting for the precise moment when Leo's attention wavered, pulling itself subtly from the grip of stillness. The strings that once hung limply now pulsed with a life of their own, tightening in deliberate, measured movements that seemed almost instinctual. The deeper into the night Leo delved, the more unsettling the shifts became. The room, once a place of solitude, began to feel alive in ways that defied reason. Shadows moved erratically across the walls, casting strange, elongated forms that danced in time with Felix's every subtle shift. The hum of the workshop intensified, vibrating through his very bones as though the building itself had become a vessel for some ancient power. The lines between reality and fantasy blurred. Every creak of the wooden floor, the rustling of unseen whispers in the corners, felt as though they were part of a larger, unseen narrative, one that was being guided by Felix. Leo's breath quickened each time he entered the workshop. His hands trembled with a mixture of awe and fear as he adjusted the strings, feeling their resistance grow stronger with each pull. The room seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, a dark energy that seeped into his thoughts and clouded his judgment. Each moment he spent with Felix became a dance between creation and something more. The marionette no longer appeared bound by the constraints of craftsmanship. He moved with intention, his gestures fluid, almost natural, like something out of a forgotten dream. There were nights when Leo would hear the faintest whisper of his own name, spoken softly from the depths of the workshop, yet when he would call out in response, there was no one there. The silence that followed was more oppressive than any sound. The strings pulled taut on their own accord, shaping movements that defied logic, creating patterns and gestures that seemed to communicate beyond simple puppetry. Felix no longer needed Leo's guidance. He had his own will, his own purpose, one that blurred the boundaries between life and lifelessness. Leo began to lose track of time, caught in the spiraling web of Felix's awakening. His obsession deepened, his desire to understand what had been unleashed growing stronger with each passing night. Every glance toward the marionette revealed something new, a deeper understanding, a darker truth, that sent shivers down his spine. The workshop, once a place of creation, became a crucible for the unknown, a space where forgotten stories and ancient energies converged in a terrifying symphony. Felix wasn't simply a marionette anymore, he was something more, a bridge between the past and the present, a vessel for the unspeakable, and an embodiment of a force that defied the limits of reality. "That's impossible," Leo whispered one evening, his voice barely a breath, as he watched the marionette step off its stand, its strings twitching in midair as if guided by unseen hands. The room was bathed in a soft, flickering candlelight, casting long, ghostly shadows that danced along the stone walls of his workshop. Every corner seemed alive, shadows stretching unnaturally, as though the very space between them held a secret waiting to be uncovered. His breath came shallow and uneven, his heart racing in his chest, as the air grew colder with every passing second. Despite the logical part of his mind screaming at him to turn away, to dismiss it all as an illusion or a trick of the imagination, Leo couldn't bring himself to move. Felix, the marionette, stood there, his carved wooden features etched in meticulous detail, his expression fixed in an unchanging, almost haunting calmness. Yet, tonight was different. The strings, once lifeless, seemed to pulse with a rhythm far beyond what Leo could understand. They twisted and writhed in the air, not with the gentle sway of controlled motion, but with a fluidity that defied the natural laws of puppetry. They stretched high into the air, spiraling and curling as if something invisible pulled them upward. Felix's joints bent, not mechanically, but with an eerie grace. His movements were slow and deliberate, each motion echoing with a strange purpose. Leo felt a chill crawl up his spine, his skin prickling as though unseen eyes were watching him from the shadows. "You're just a puppet," he whispered again, his voice quivering. But the words held little weight against the overwhelming sense that he was no longer in control. The room hummed, a low, almost imperceptible sound that grew louder with every passing second. It wasn't just Felix moving, it was something deeper, something older, something beyond the confines of mere craftsmanship. His gaze locked onto the marionette's wooden face, searching for a flicker of lifelessness, anything that would assure him that this was still the creation of his hands. Yet, Felix didn't waver. His eyes seemed to pierce through the darkness, their depths holding more than they should, a haunting stillness layered with something deeper than emotion. Each twitch of the strings was a deliberate response, as though Felix had a will of his own, one that existed outside the realm of logic. They shifted and tightened, weaving patterns in midair that defied gravity, creating arcs and spirals that seemed to pulse with an unnatural life. Leo's breath caught in his throat as he took a hesitant step back, the weight of fear and disbelief pressing down on him like a heavy mantle. His fingers tightened around his workbench as though grounding himself against the unsettling reality that was unfolding before him. "This can't be real," he muttered under his breath, the words falling flat in the thick, oppressive air. And yet, the proof was undeniable. Felix moved with precision, his every gesture harmonizing with the invisible forces guiding the strings. It was no longer a simple puppetry performance. It was something far more sinister, something far more alive. The shadows in the room seemed to shift with an eerie fluidity, elongating and twisting in response to Felix's movements. They slithered across the walls, pooling in corners and stretching toward the marionette, as though feeding off the energy that radiated from him. The candles flickered violently, casting unpredictable glimmers of light and shadow, making it impossible to separate reality from the ever-deepening nightmare that had consumed the workshop. The very air felt alive, thick, suffocating, as if time itself was bending around Felix's every twitch. Leo's mind raced, desperate for a foothold in the logic of the world he thought he knew. Yet, every rational thought slipped through his grasp like sand in an hourglass. The strings of Felix continued to dance, their movements becoming faster, more erratic, as though the marionette were composing its own chaotic symphony. The room seemed alive with this symphony, every creak of the floorboards, every distant whisper in the shadows, a cacophony that drowned out reason and logic. As Felix's movements became more intense, so too did the oppressive stillness that hung between them. Time stretched longer, blurring into an endless loop, where past and present collided into a singular, terrifying moment. Leo's breath hitched, his chest rising and falling rapidly, as he realized that he was no longer just an observer. The strings had become tangled with something ancient, something insidious, and it was pulling him into its grasp. "No," Leo breathed, his voice breaking. "No, you're just a puppet." But the words fell flat, a whisper in the void, lost to the power that had overtaken his workshop. But Felix responded with a hollow, chilling grin, a movement more human than mechanical. The expression stretched slowly across his wooden face, the corners of his carved lips twitching with a haunting precision. It wasn't a smile born from joy or amusement, but something far darker, something almost alive. Leo's breath caught in his throat, his heart pounding violently as the chilling sight unfolded before him. The grin seemed to hang in the air, lingering longer than any natural movement should, as though time itself had slowed to accommodate the grotesque expression. The workshop was still, save for the flickering of candlelight, casting shifting, ominous shadows that danced wildly along the walls. The air grew heavier with each second, each breath shallow and labored. Every detail of the marionette's expression was unnaturally fluid, the way his lips parted ever so slightly, the curve of his smile deepening in a slow, deliberate fashion. It wasn't rushed, nor did it carry the hesitation one might expect from a lifeless object. It was deliberate, measured, as if Felix was savoring the fear in Leo's eyes, feeding off the unease that crept through the room like a heavy fog. Leo's mind raced to grasp what he was witnessing, but logic eluded him entirely. There was no rational explanation for how a mere wooden figure could display such emotion, such a hauntingly realistic expression. His breath quickened, his hands trembling as though the very room resisted his control. Felix's grin twisted further, the unsettling smile expanding into something altogether sinister, a mockery of humanity, distorted and unnatural. The smooth, polished wood of his face seemed to shimmer in the flickering candlelight, casting eerie reflections that distorted his features further, amplifying the unsettling realism of his grin. The strings above Felix writhed in midair, each twitch more erratic, as though they too were manipulated by forces beyond understanding. The room itself seemed to hum with a low, sinister energy, a vibration that resonated in Leo's bones, a pulsation that mirrored the movement of the marionette. Shadows stretched long and dark, weaving in and out of the corners with a life of their own. The air felt thick, oppressive, as if the weight of something ancient pressed down on every surface, amplifying the tension that hung between them. Leo's breath came in short, sharp bursts, his chest rising and falling with a desperate urgency as he fought against the overwhelming sensation that something had taken control of the room. Felix's grin continued to stretch, an unnatural curve that seemed to stretch further the longer he observed it. It was as though the smile itself was alive, an entity born from the dark corners of the workshop, feeding off his fear, growing with each passing moment. He tried to speak, his voice trembling with panic, but no words formed. His mouth moved, but sound was swallowed by the oppressive stillness that had enveloped the room. The very air seemed to drain of sound, leaving only the haunting sight of Felix's ghastly grin looming before him. The marionette's gaze seemed to pierce through him, deep into his very soul, leaving him vulnerable to the malevolent force controlling his every thought. The room seemed alive, each crack in the floorboards, every creak of the wooden beams, contributing to the surreal, nightmarish atmosphere. Shadows crawled along the walls, slithering closer, their presence suffocating, surrounding him with an ever-tightening grip. And all the while, Felix's grin widened, mocking, taunting, digging deeper into the very essence of Leo's sanity. The weight of the moment pressed down so heavily that breathing became a struggle, the oppressive atmosphere threatening to consume him completely. In that moment, Leo was no longer sure of what was real. The marionette's expression defied comprehension, defied the limits of logic and craftsmanship. Felix was no longer just a puppet. He was a vessel for something far older, far more malevolent, a force that had waited in the shadows for the perfect moment to emerge. And in the face of that haunting grin, Leo's reality began to fracture, leaving him to question whether he would ever escape the grasp of what had taken hold. Soon after Felix's first movements, a string of unsettling events began to unfold. Whisper Hollow had always been a place shrouded in mystery, its cobblestone streets lined with tales that hinted at forgotten sins and ancient secrets. However, what began as subtle whispers soon escalated into a pervasive atmosphere of unease. The townsfolk, once accustomed to the eerie stories passed down through generations, found themselves increasingly disturbed by a deeper, darker presence, one that could no longer be dismissed as mere superstition. What began as unsettling murmurs echoed louder, spreading like a contagion, filling the air with fear. Gruesome murders began to appear with terrifying regularity, each more grotesque than the last. Victims were discovered in secluded, shadowed corners of Whisper Hollow, their bodies showing no signs of struggle, yet bearing haunting, lifeless expressions. The wounds they bore were deliberate, methodical, crafted with a precision that defied any natural cause. Silent, serene deaths left behind empty husks of what had once been living souls, their faces frozen in terror and confusion. Tales of betrayal, of secret pacts with dark forces, resurfaced from the town's deepest recesses, tying the victims to a legacy of deceit and malevolence that had been buried beneath layers of time and myth. The line between folklore and reality blurred, becoming more indistinct with each passing day. And with every passing crime, Felix's movements became more precise, more deliberate. The marionette's eerie performances shifted from simple gestures to haunting, purposeful actions. Where once his strings moved him in a playful, mechanical fashion, now they twisted and contorted with unnerving fluidity. His hands grasped at thin air as if manipulating unseen forces, tracing symbols that shimmered briefly in the dim light, symbols no one could understand yet. Felt compelled to fear. The shadows in the workshop darkened, stretching into grotesque shapes that mirrored Felix's every motion, feeding off the malevolent energy pulsing through the room. The atmosphere grew thick, oppressive, as though the very air resisted the light, suffocating those who dared enter. Leo watched in horror, his mind racing to comprehend the unnatural transformation taking place. The once lifeless marionette seemed to possess a mind of its own, his movements no longer bound by the constraints of craftsmanship or mere mechanics. Felix's smile deepened into something sinister, a twisted mockery of humanity, his grin widening as if he fed off the terror that surrounded him. The strings, once merely instruments of manipulation, now seemed alive, tangled in chaotic, intricate patterns that pulsed with a malevolent energy. They moved with a dark purpose, weaving in and out of the air, creating an unsettling dance that echoed the horrors the town faced. The townspeople were no longer sure where the stories of Felix ended and reality began. Murmurs of ancient rituals, long-forgotten curses, and shadowy figures that danced beyond the edges of consciousness filled the air. Whispers became screams, and the boundaries between truth and myth blurred until they dissolved completely. Those who entered the workshop to seek answers rarely emerged the same. Their minds were warped, their sanity eroded, as they came face to face with something far beyond their understanding. Felix had become the embodiment of the darkness that had haunted Whisper Hollow for centuries, a vessel for the very nightmares the town had kept buried. As the murders continued, a grim pattern emerged. Each victim's death mirrored Felix's movements more closely. His motions became less mechanical and more human, as if absorbing the agony and despair of the town into his very being. The marionette no longer needed the strings to move. He shifted and twisted, a malevolent force unto himself. Shadows wrapped around him, pulling him into the depths of an unseen abyss, blending him with the darkness that devoured Whisper Hollow. Leo's once fervent curiosity had long since been replaced with terror. The room, once his sanctuary, now felt like a tomb. The candles flickered, their flames dancing erratically as if struggling to remain lit. The oppressive silence was broken only by the distant echoes of whispers that seemed to come from every direction, coiling around him, suffocating him in a suffocating embrace. Each movement of Felix was a harbinger of something far worse, something that defied comprehension and sanity. The town had lost control, consumed by the malevolent force that had claimed Felix as its own, and it seemed that Whisper Hollow was destined to fall into a darkness from which there could be no return. It's not just a puppet, Leo realized in horror. It's alive, but not in the way he imagined. At first, he believed it to be a creation, a masterpiece of craftsmanship, lifeless yet intricately designed, manipulated solely by his will. The strings, the motions, the expressions, all of it seemed controlled, bound by the limits of his skill and imagination. Yet, the longer he spent time with Felix, the more he came to understand that this was something far more profound, something beyond mere artistry or mechanical manipulation. Felix was alive, yes, but not in the tangible sense of the word. The puppet's movements were smooth and deliberate, but there was something unervingly organic about them. His gestures seemed to breathe with a purpose, as though they were driven by something entirely separate from Leo's own intentions. The strings that once merely attached Felix to wooden limbs now seemed to pulse with an eerie life of their own. The faint hum they made when moved was not mechanical. It was something deeper, darker, vibrating at a frequency that stirred something primal within Leo's chest. Every night spent with Felix brought more revelations, each more unsettling than the last. At first, it was subtle. The way the marionette tilted its head in response to nothing visible, its movements slowly shifting from innocent manipulation to something altogether more sinister. The puppeteer's hands, once in complete control, began to feel like mere guides, as if Felix had developed a will of its own, a will that neither Leo nor anyone else could comprehend or predict. Leo would find himself paralyzed with fear as Felix's fingers, once lifeless, traced delicate patterns through the air. The strings no longer required physical manipulation to move. They danced through the dim light of the workshop as if steered by unseen hands, hands that reached from a world beyond the known. Shadows flickered around Felix's every movement, the darkness twisting to mimic his actions, feeding off his energy like a parasite. The room became a sanctuary for malevolence, where the very space seemed to ripple in response to the puppet's presence. At times, Felix's eyes, empty sockets stitched into a smiling face, seemed to gaze directly into Leo's soul. They no longer held the innocent emptiness they once did. Instead, they glowed faintly in the dim light, flickering with an unsettling intelligence, an awareness that defied logic and reason. There was a malevolence hidden beneath that grin, something ancient and unspeakable that seeped into every motion the marionette made. The puppet seemed to exist on the fringes of reality, a vessel through which dark forces manifested. Leo couldn't deny the sense of dread that enveloped him. The connection between the puppet and the malevolent force it seemed to harbor deepened with every passing day. Felix's actions became more unpredictable, sometimes gentle, sometimes grotesque. His gestures often seemed to mirror the dark desires of those who once sought him out in whispers. The puppet's movements were deliberate, intricate, pulling from a well of knowledge that wasn't bound by the physical world. It was as if Felix had absorbed centuries of forgotten tales, curses, and secrets. Seeds of darkness sown into his very essence. The strings swayed on their own accord, twisting into patterns that defied physics, creating shapes only the mind could comprehend in its darkest moments. They cut through the air with a sharpness that spoke of pain and torment, painting the room with haunting visuals that Leo could neither understand nor escape. The atmosphere became thick with an oppressive weight, a force so suffocating it felt like breathing was impossible. Shadows became living entities, swirling around the marionette like a vortex of nightmare. Leo often thought of escape, but the workshop was a prison as much as it was a sanctuary. Every attempt to flee was met with a growing sense of futility. Felix's presence followed him, imprinted onto his very consciousness. Dreams became haunting visions of the puppet's grotesque movements, twisted beyond recognition into scenes of horror that blurred the line between illusion and reality. And yet, there was a morbid fascination he couldn't shake. No matter how terrified he was, part of him was consumed by an insatiable desire to understand, to uncover the truth behind Felix's existence. But the truth eluded him, slipping further away with every passing moment. It wasn't simply that Felix was alive, it was that he was more alive than anything Leo had ever encountered. Not in the way of flesh and bone, but in the way of something far more ancient and primal, an embodiment of forgotten darkness that had lain dormant for centuries, waiting for the right moment to rise once again. As the nights grew longer and the darkness deeper, Leo knew that Felix wasn't just alive. He was something far more sinister, a bridge to a realm of unspeakable horrors, and with each passing moment, the strings tightened, pulling him closer to the abyss alongside the puppet. "Leo," his friend Clara said, her voice shaking with fear. "You need to stop." Felix isn't just a marionette. He's tied to something darker. A curse. Leo's hands trembled as he clutched the strings, his breath shallow and uneven. Clara's words echoed in his mind, stirring a sense of unease that had been building steadily over the past weeks. It wasn't just her concern. Everyone in Whisper Hollow had begun to speak in hushed tones about the strange, haunting occurrences since Felix arrived. Whispers of missing villagers, eerie figures seen lurking in the shadows, and a pervasive sense of dread spread through the town like wildfire. The workshop, once his sanctuary, now felt like a prison. The air itself seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour, laden with the oppressive weight of darkness that clung to Felix like a second skin. The marionette's movements, once subtle and fluid, had taken on a disturbingly unnatural rhythm, a haunting dance that painted macabre images in the very space around him. Shadows twisted and contorted, mimicking Felix's movements, creating grotesque illusions that blurred the boundaries between reality and nightmare. Clara's voice was a lifeline, a desperate plea for him to see the truth. "You've been so focused on the art of puppetry that you've ignored the whispers of the town," she continued, her eyes locked onto his. "Every person who's had dealings with Felix, every story that's been told, is tied to a tragedy, a dark fate that's always lurking just beneath the surface. The curse isn't just some ancient tale, it's alive. It feeds off the chaos, the fear, the suffering. And now it's feeding off you." Leo flinched at her words, his mind reeling with the weight of her revelation. Clara wasn't someone who easily succumbed to fear, nor did she believe in idle superstition. Yet, the conviction in her voice was undeniable, rooted in a truth that he couldn't ignore. He remembered the stories whispered by the townsfolk, the old legends of a marionette that brought destruction, a creation once crafted by a man consumed by his own dark desires. Felix was more than just a puppet, he was the embodiment of those cursed stories, a vessel for a malevolent force that had been bound to the town for generations. The strings tightened in his grasp, their connection to Felix growing stronger with each passing moment. And as the darkness outside deepened, Leo could feel it pulling him into a pit of despair, eroding his grasp on reality. Clara's words cut through his spiraling thoughts like a blade, forcing him to confront the truth that Felix was more than art, he was a gateway to something far more terrifying. "You have to let him go," Clara said, her voice a desperate whisper in the stillness. "You can't control what's happening anymore. The more you fight it, the stronger it becomes." Her gaze shifted, flickering to Felix's eerie form standing motionless at the far end of the room. Every movement, every breath. It's not his anymore. It belongs to something darker, something that's been waiting for a moment like this to emerge. Leo swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing down on him. The once familiar strings felt foreign now, pulling in a direction he couldn't control. Felix's grin widened ever so slightly, as if feeding off the fear that radiated from the room. Each twitch of the marionette seemed to speak of a greater purpose, one not bound by artistry or skill, but by an ancient force desperate for release. The workshop felt colder, the shadows deeper, and the very air around him seemed to thrum with a malevolent energy that threatened to consume him whole. He could no longer deny Clara's warnings. Felix wasn't just a marionette. He was a curse, a living embodiment of forgotten terrors, and Leo's grip on the strings was no longer enough to shield him from the darkness that threatened to consume his very soul. In the dim light of the workshop, the tension became unbearable. Every creak of the wooden floorboards echoed ominously, each breath felt heavier as if the room itself exhaled a breath of menace. Felix's presence loomed larger than life, his unnatural movements twisting through the air like a haunting specter determined to claim control. Leo struggled against the pull, his mind racing to find an escape, a way to sever the connection. Yet deep down he knew it was futile. The curse had already taken root, embedding itself into the fabric of his existence. Felix wasn't a mere marionette anymore. He was a vessel, a portal through which dark forces had seeped into his reality. The strings were no longer instruments of art. They were chains binding him to something ancient, something that thrived on chaos and destruction. Clara's words echoed again in his mind. "You have to let him go." But how could he let go of something that no longer felt like his? How could he abandon a creation that had become something far beyond his control? The very thought of relinquishing Felix felt like tearing away a part of himself, even as his heart screamed for freedom from the dark grip of the curse. The silence stretched between them, heavier than the weight of the strings themselves. The workshop was no longer a place of creation. It was a battleground between the known and the unknown, between the light of reason and the consuming shadows of something far more malevolent. And as the darkness closed in, Leo realized that letting go might be the only way to survive. But at what cost? Leo clenched his fists, his mind racing through old tales his father used to tell him about puppets that could control life and death. The stories had seemed like myths, until now. As a child, those stories had been terrifying. His father's voice would weave dark narratives late into the night, describing marionettes with hollow, lifeless eyes that seemed to glimpse into the very depths of human souls. Each tale painted a picture of creation gone wrong, of puppets that came to life not through magic, but through something darker, something rooted in despair, grief, or forgotten power. Leo would lie awake, staring at the shadows on the walls, half convinced they were shifting, mirroring the movements of those cursed marionettes. Back then, Leo had dismissed them, believing they were mere cautionary tales meant to keep children in line. But now, standing in his workshop surrounded by the haunting presence of Felix, those stories no longer felt like myths. They felt like warnings, warnings from a past far more intertwined with the supernatural than anyone dared to admit. His father's voice echoed in his mind, deeper and more ominous than he remembered. There are some creations that are too powerful for their own good, his father had said. Puppets made from desperation, from pain. Those aren't meant to simply entertain. They bring more than joy. They carry burdens, dark and unrelenting, that consume anyone who tries to control them. Each word had been laced with caution, yet his younger self had only understood the surface of what his father was trying to convey. Now, standing in the dim light of the workshop with Felix looming before him, those words felt like an inescapable truth. The marionette didn't just stand passively on the workbench, it shifted, subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. It was a dance, but not one of artistic expression. It was something deeper, something sinister. Movement dictated not by strings or control, but by an unseen force that seemed to seep from within. Leo's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the lifeless wooden figure, watching as the strings above it twitched on their own, as if pulled by phantom hands. The chill that ran down his spine wasn't just a response to the cold, it was the unmistakable sensation of being watched, by something beyond reason, beyond the bounds of reality. Felix wasn't just a marionette, it was a vessel, a puppet not bound by the ordinary rules of creation. The old tales had always spoken of the imbalance between art and magic, of the dangers that arose when creation strayed too far from their intended purpose. In the stories, those marionettes had been instruments of destruction, weaving chaos wherever they went. And now, standing before Felix, Leo could see the echoes of those stories unfolding before his very eyes. Each flicker of movement, every subtle shift in posture, revealed a malevolence that couldn't be easily ignored. Clara's warning still burned in his ears. Felix isn't just a marionette. He's tied to something darker, a curse. Her voice, trembling with fear, replayed over and over in his mind, forcing him to confront the terrifying reality of what he had stumbled into. The curse wasn't a mere legend. It was alive, and it had latched onto Felix with a hunger that only seemed to grow with time. Every passing moment became a struggle for control, a battle not between man and marionette, but between sanity and the abyss. Leo's grip tightened on the strings, though he knew they no longer responded to him in the same way. Felix's movements had become erratic, unpredictable, as if driven by impulses that defied reason, creating an unsettling rhythm that echoed through the stillness of the room. Shadows danced on the walls, twisting and contorting, mimicking the unnatural gestures of the marionette as if feeding off the chaos that surrounded it. The workshop no longer felt like his sanctuary. It was a space of unease, of creeping dread that seeped into every corner and crevice. The air itself seemed heavier, clinging to his skin with an oppressive weight. And the once clear lines between creativity and control blurred, replaced by an ever-deepening abyss where Felix's strings pulled not only his mind but his very sense of reality. Leo's breath quickened as he fought to piece together his thoughts, to cling to reason in the face of this spiraling nightmare. The stories from his childhood had been distant echoes of fear. Now they were the foundation of a living nightmare that threatened to consume him entirely. Felix wasn't merely a puppet anymore. He was a harbinger of something ancient, a force tethered to forgotten darkness, and no amount of willpower could sever the strings once they had been entangled in such malevolence. With each subtle movement, each sinister shift in posture, Leo knew the truth. Felix had transcended mere artistry. He had become a force of destruction, a reflection of the darkness that had been waiting for a moment like this to re-emerge into the world. And as the strings pulled tighter, pulling him into a deeper madness, Leo realized there was no escaping the truth. He had created something far beyond his control, a puppet that could command life and death. Felix began to reveal secrets. "The strings are not just for show," he whispered, his wooden lips moving eerily. "They pull memories from the past. Memories long buried." Leo's breath hitched, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fascination. The room seemed to grow colder with every word Felix uttered, the air thick with the weight of ancient secrets. At first, it felt as though the marionette's voice was a trick of his imagination, just a mechanical hum meant to unnerve him. But as Felix continued, the truth of his words seeped into Leo's very being, unraveling the carefully constructed reality he thought he knew. "The strings aren't merely tied to movement," Felix said in a voice that resonated deep within Leo's bones. "They are the threads that weave together the forgotten, the suppressed, and the hidden. They pull memories from the depths of the earth, from the shadows of the dead, from the dark recesses of history that refused to stay buried." Every syllable was laced with a chilling gravity, and with each revelation, the boundaries between past and present blurred more completely. Leo's mind reeled, struggling to grasp the implications. How could a puppet, a lifeless construct of wood and string, possess such power? And yet, the evidence was all around him. Felix's movements were deliberate, almost as if he were channeling a force beyond comprehension, a force that had been waiting to rise from the depths of Whisper Hollow's history. The town's history, once obscured behind layers of forgotten tales and veiled truths, began to surface through Felix's unnerving gestures. Shadows flickered across the walls, each movement of the marionette unlocking scenes long thought to be lost in the annals of time. Leo saw visions, vivid, haunting visions, of the town's founders, their faces twisted with ambition, striking deals with figures of incomprehensible power. These weren't mere fables. These were dark bargains sealed in blood, pacts made in desperation for control over the town's future at the expense of innocent lives. One scene in particular seared itself into Leo's mind, a gathering of men and women cloaked in secrecy, their voices a murmur of promises and threats. They spoke of summoning forces beyond the veil, of bargaining with entities whose very existence defied the natural order. The deals they made were sinister, each shadowy figure calling upon ancient powers, powers that exacted a terrible toll. Innocent lives were sacrificed, their suffering fueling the dark entities they sought to bind. The murders that plagued Whisper Hollow were not random acts of violence. They were the echoes of these dark transactions, ripples spreading through the fabric of reality as the cursed agreements came to fruition. Each victim left behind bore the mark of their tormentor's sins, torn apart, drained of life force, as though consumed by the very darkness that Felix embodied. The town's streets, once peaceful and quaint, were stained with this blood, and the very air reeked of forgotten malice. Felix's movements grew more precise, his strings pulling with an almost hypnotic rhythm as though guided by the weight of countless lives lost to the sinister plots of generations past. Leo could feel the malevolent pull of those strings tugging at his consciousness, dragging him into memories that were not his own, yet felt disturbingly familiar. Each pivot of the marionette's wooden arms conjured scenes of despair. Village elders conspiring with shadowy figures, children disappearing into the woods, whispers of unspeakable rituals passed down in hushed tones through the generations. The deeper Leo sank into these visions, the more his reality began to fracture. What had once been mere stories passed down in whispers was now a suffocating reality, one that threatened to consume him whole. Every turn, every subtle movement, spoke of power twisted beyond reason, a power so ancient, so uncontrollable, that it defied any attempt at understanding. The strings weren't just pulling at memories, they were awakening something darker, something insidious that had been slumbering beneath Whisper Hollow for centuries. And Felix, once thought to be a harmless creation of wood and string, had become the vessel through which this malevolence was unleashed. Leo's breath quickened, his hands trembling as he desperately tried to pull back, to sever the connection between him and Felix. But it was futile. The strings tightened their grip on his thoughts, pulling him deeper into the abyss of a past he couldn't escape, a past that had been meticulously hidden for far too long. With each horrific revelation, the line between reality and nightmare blurred. Felix's voice became a haunting symphony of dark truths, unraveling the very essence of the town's existence. Whisper Hollow's history was no longer a collection of forgotten stories. It was a living, breathing nightmare that threatened to consume everything in its path. And Leo, the unsuspecting puppeteer, was caught in its sinister web, unable to escape the strings that bound him to the ancient darkness. "Stop!" Leo shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. His fists clenched tightly, nails digging into his palms as if physical pain could sever the grip that Felix had over him. His breath came in ragged gasps, each one heavier than the last, as though the very air was thick with some unseen force. "You can't control this." But Felix only smiled, an unsettling, hollow grin that seemed to stretch wider with each passing second. His wooden fingers moved ever so slightly, his strings twitching with a life of their own. The motion was subtle, yet deliberate, as if mocking every ounce of resistance Leo tried to summon. The room fell into an eerie silence, the only sound being the faint creaking of the strings as they tightened ever so slightly, pulling at Leo's sanity with an agonizing precision. The marionette's gaze bore into him, cold and unyielding, making Leo feel as though the walls were closing in, suffocating him with an overwhelming sense of helplessness. "You're just a puppet," Leo whispered, his voice a mere breath in the oppressive stillness. His heart pounded furiously against his ribcage, his pulse a frantic drumbeat in his ears. A lifeless creation. Nothing more. But Felix's grin didn't waver. In fact, it grew deeper, more sinister. His expression seemed almost human, inhumanly calculated, as if every slight movement of his lips was a reflection of something far more sinister than simple artistry. "You misunderstand, Leo," Felix said, his voice low and smooth, like a serpent's hiss. "I am not merely a puppet. You see, the strings that bind me are the very threads of this town's history, the very essence of its dark past." Leo's breath hitched as the words echoed in his mind, a chilling realization sinking in. It was not just the marionette itself that held power, it was the strings. They were not just mechanical appendages, but conduits to something ancient, something twisted beyond comprehension. Felix wasn't merely performing movements, he was pulling memories, emotions, and histories that the town had tried desperately to forget. "These aren't just strings," Felix continued, his voice a haunting lullaby. "They are conduits to the sins and secrets buried beneath Whisper Hollow's surface. Every movement I make taps into the collective consciousness of this place, into the horrors that have long been ignored, the whispers of betrayal, and the nightmares that have been passed down through generations." Leo's mind reeled. He thought of his childhood stories, the tales his father told him about the old town and its founders making deals with dark forces, desperate to gain power at any cost. But those stories had always been just that, stories. Myths spun to frighten children into obedience. Now, with Felix's words echoing in his mind, the line between myth and reality blurred. "I've seen the darkness," Felix said, his voice deepening, becoming more resonant with each syllable. "I've lived the betrayal, the longing for immortality, the hunger for influence at the expense of the innocent. The strings pull not just my movements, but the very essence of their sins, the very foundation of Whisper Hollow." Leo's breath hitched again as the weight of the marionette's presence bore down on him. The strings stretched like shadows, creeping into his mind and pulling out memories he didn't know he possessed. The lines between fantasy and reality blurred further, the very walls of his workshop seeming to tremble under the sinister influence of Felix's eerie control. "You're trapped," Felix whispered, his voice a haunting melody of inevitability. "Every movement I make shapes the future, and the past. You cannot escape it." Leo's thoughts spun into chaos, struggling to piece together some form of resistance. But no matter how hard he tried, the strings would not relent. They tightened with a merciless grip, each pull forcing him to confront his deepest fears and darkest memories. The lines of control no longer felt mechanical, they felt alive, woven from the very fabric of Whisper Hollow's long-buried sins. "Why?" Leo managed to gasp, his voice cracking under the weight of the revelations. "Why are you doing this?" Felix's smile deepened into something grotesque, something inhuman. "Because the past doesn't die easily, Leo. It festers in the shadows, waiting for someone to set it free." With each passing second, the strings seemed to weave tighter, pulling Leo deeper into a world of forgotten horrors, a place where innocence had long since been sacrificed to the ever-reaching claws of Whisper Hollow's malevolence. Desperate, Leo delved deeper into the stories. old letters, faded photographs, and fragments of whispered secrets passed down through generations. Each piece seemed to unravel a new layer of the town's torment, revealing forgotten horrors that had been locked away in the darkest corners of Whisper Hollow's past. The weight of each discovery pressed down on him, suffocating in its intensity. The old letters spoke of deals made in desperation, of bargains sealed with blood, where innocents were sacrificed to appease unseen forces. These weren't mere contracts. They were dark oaths written in anguish and desperation, vows to forces that demanded eternal servitude in exchange for fleeting power. Faded photographs captured moments long since lost, images of townsfolk whose expressions were etched with fear and anguish, souls tethered to something far beyond mortal understanding. Their eyes, hollow and distant, seemed to whisper silent pleas for release from the nightmares that had been woven into their very existence. Fractured whispers filled the air, weaving tales of shadowy figures lurking in the mist, their intentions obscured by the very darkness they thrived in. These figures weren't ghosts of the past. They were the echoes of living nightmares, trapped in a perpetual dance of manipulation and deceit. Tales of secret rituals, midnight gatherings beneath ancient oaks, and ritualistic sacrifices became the fabric of whispered history, passed down through generations like a curse passed from one soul to the next. Leo's hands trembled as he sifted through the fragments, torn pages, scribbled notes, and ancient manuscripts that seemed to hum with a malevolent energy. Each piece added another layer of horror, revealing the full extent of Whisper Hollow's dark heritage. The town's founders, once revered for their ambition, were no longer figures of respect but of condemnation. Their pursuit of power and influence had led them down a path of madness, summoning forces that they could neither control nor comprehend. The cost had been too high, lives lost, families shattered, and an entire community bound to a fate darker than any curse. Through Felix's movements, these pieces came to life. The stories told of forgotten betrayals, ruthless acts of revenge, and the insatiable hunger for dominance over the unknown. The puppeteer, once admired for his art, had long since been corrupted, his creations becoming extensions of his darkest desires. Felix wasn't merely a puppet. He was the manifestation of those dark desires, the vessel through which the town's most sinister wishes materialized. The strings weren't just instruments of manipulation, they were conduits for the very essence of chaos. With every twitch, every motion, Felix drew power from the depths of Whisper Hollow's sorrow, feeding off the misery and darkness that had festered for centuries. The very fabric of reality seemed to warp as the marionette danced its sinister ballet, pulling Leo deeper into a web of despair. Leo began to understand that to stop Felix meant confronting not just the cursed marionette, but the very foundation of the town's darkest secrets. The memories unearthed weren't just haunting, they were dangerous, blurring the lines between reality and the sinister forces that lurked beyond. They were gateways to realms where time itself bent, where the past and present converged in a grotesque union of pain and madness. Every unraveling thread revealed a deeper abyss, dragging Leo further into a darkness where sanity was an illusion and escape was nothing more than a fleeting dream. Every step forward into the truth led him deeper into a labyrinth of dread, where the past and present converged in a web of twisted fate. Felix's strings became a noose, tightening around Leo's mind, threatening to pull him into the abyss of madness that the town had fought so hard to bury. The shadows grew heavier, the silence louder, and the weight of the curse unbearable, blurring the lines between his own identity and the twisted entity that controlled his every move. The marionette doesn't act alone, Felix revealed one night, his voice a haunting whisper that seemed to seep into the very fabric of the room, sending shivers down Leo's spine. "You pull the strings as much as I do." Leo's breath hitched, his pulse pounding in his ears. The room felt heavier, the air thick with an unnatural tension. Every movement Felix made was deliberate, each gesture more calculated, more fluid, as if guided by some unseen force, an entity that neither of them fully understood. The strings that connected them seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, a dark current that surged through his veins. It was as though Felix wasn't merely a marionette, but a manifestation of a greater, more insidious force, a force that blurred the boundaries between reality and darkness. With every subtle twitch of Felix's fingers, with every slight turn of his head, Leo felt his own thoughts begin to twist. The once clear line between what was his will and what was influenced by the puppet began to blur, creating a sense of helplessness that clawed at his sanity. The connection wasn't just about control, it was deeper than that. It was about possession, about an overwhelming sense of being tethered to something malevolent, something ancient and forgotten. The strings, once mere tools for manipulation, now felt alive, alive with a hunger for dominance, for the domination of both mind and soul. Every time Felix moved, a flicker of something darker flashed behind his hollow eyes, a glimpse into memories that weren't his own, but shared through the very strings they both danced upon. The twisted echoes of past events seemed to infiltrate Leo's thoughts, replaying the darkest moments of Whisper Hollow's history. Betrayals, secrets, and sins long buried resurfaced in vivid, haunting visions, leaving Leo unable to distinguish reality from the sinister web Felix wove. The weight of the marionette's influence became unbearable. It wasn't just the mechanical movements or hollow gestures. It was the way Felix seemed to know him, to anticipate his every move as if their consciousnesses were merging into one. A sense of dread gripped Leo's chest, tightening with each passing second. He could feel his thoughts being manipulated, his will bending to the unseen strings that controlled not only Felix but perhaps something far more terrifying. And yet, no matter how hard he fought, the strings tightened just a little more with every attempt to break free. Felix smiled, a grin devoid of warmth or humanity, as though mocking his futile resistance. The lines between truth and illusion blurred even further, and Leo could feel the darkness seep into every fiber of his being. It was as if the very air itself had become saturated with malevolence, leaving him trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. In a final desperate attempt to sever the curse, Leo gathered the courage to confront Felix in the town's ancient theater, the very place where the marionette had first been brought to life. The theater stood in solemn decay, its grandeur long lost to the passage of time. Dust hung in the air like a shroud, settling over the ornate balconies and faded red velvet curtains that had once framed the stage. The floorboards creaked with every cautious step Leo took, their sound echoing through the empty expanse as though resonating with the whispers of forgotten tragedies. The strings stretched across the room, their shadows stretching far beyond the reach of the dim, flickering lanterns. Each thread shimmered faintly, catching the scarce light in eerie, unnatural ways. They slithered through the air like living tendrils, coiling and intertwining in impossible patterns that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. Shadows danced on the walls, stretching grotesque silhouettes that flickered with the memories of past performances, ghastly spectacles where joy and laughter had long since been replaced by sorrow and despair. The weight of history pressed heavily upon Leo's chest, a suffocating reminder of the countless souls ensnared by the strings over the centuries. Every creak beneath his feet felt like the final gasp of a dying theater, a mournful reminder of what once was. Yet, as he advanced, the strings seemed to respond, their hum growing louder, more insistent. It was as if they recognized him, not as an intruder, but as a participant in a long-forgotten ritual. His breath quickened, the cold air biting at his skin as he moved closer to the stage. The ornate stage where Felix had first been brought to life. The place where dark rituals had been performed, where the first notes of haunting melodies had echoed through the hollow auditorium. The very space where innocence had been traded for power, and the boundary between life and death had blurred into something grotesque and unnatural. Leo's hands trembled, gripping at the fabric of his coat tightly. The strings seemed alive in his grasp, their vibrations sending shivers up his spine as if reacting to his very thoughts. Memories surged forward unbidden. Visions of townsfolk crying out for justice, of shadowy figures weaving dark bargains in exchange for their souls. The theater's walls seemed to close in on him, the past and present merging into a single, oppressive reality. "You can't escape," Felix's voice whispered, hollow and distant, yet unmistakably present. The marionette stood center stage, its once lifeless wooden form now emanating a sinister, almost living energy. Its eyes gleamed faintly in the dim light, reflecting Leo's own reflection twisted and distorted through the haunted shadows cast by the strings. Leo's breath hitched, a cold sweat trickling down his brow. The realization hit him with the force of a tidal wave. The marionette wasn't merely a vessel, it was a conduit, an entity that had been orchestrating the darkness for generations. The strings weren't bound by his control, they were guided by something far more malevolent, a force that had woven itself into the very fabric of the town's existence. Every movement Felix made was deliberate, calculated. The strings responded with precision, shifting in ways that were impossibly graceful, inhuman. They tightened subtly, almost imperceptibly, as though seeking to entangle Leo's very soul in their web of malevolence. The theater became a stage for a macabre ballet, where the marionette was both master and puppet master, directing the twisted symphony of death and despair. Leo's will fought fiercely, but it felt futile. The darkness was too pervasive, the weight of the curse too suffocating. His voice trembled with desperation, the words falling like ashes from his lips as he screamed, "You can't control this." Felix's grin widened, a hollow, unsettling expression etched into his wooden features. The strings pulled taut, weaving a tapestry of torment, ensnaring Leo further into their grasp. Every breath became a struggle, every thought clouded by the oppressive influence that seeped through the theater like a haunting mist. The boundaries between reality and nightmare blurred, leaving Leo trapped in a never-ending cycle of torment. The ancient theater seemed alive with the suffering of countless generations, a place where the past had fused with the present to create a relentless, haunting symphony of sorrow. Leo understood at last that the strings weren't just tools of manipulation. They were conduits for darkness, channels through which the malevolent forces of Whisper Hollow's cursed history could seep into the world. And in that realization, he knew the finality of his fate. "This ends now," Leo said, his voice steady, though his heart pounded with a suffocating pressure. The ancient theater seemed alive with an oppressive weight. Its wooden beams creaked and moaned under the weight of unseen memories. His breath hitched as he stared down Felix, who stood tall and composed, the strings wrapped around him like a twisted symphony of fate. "You're nothing more than wood and string." But Felix didn't respond immediately. The wooden figure remained eerily still, his haunting grin unchanged, eyes fixed on Leo with a predatory intensity. There was no need for words. The silence between them was heavier than any spoken threat, an unbreakable bond woven from generations of fear, deceit, and sorrow. Leo's fists tightened, his mind racing as memories flooded back. Visions of whispered stories passed down through the town, of deals made in secret, and souls twisted by the strings of ambition and revenge. He had come here with the intent to end the nightmare, to free Whisper Hollow from its curse, but now he wasn't so sure if it was that simple. Felix wasn't just a marionette. He was a vessel for something far darker, something more ancient, something deeply rooted in the very essence of the town's foundation. "Is that what you really believe?" Felix said at last, his voice smooth and distorted, as though it came from deeper within the wood than could be understood. "That I'm merely wood and string? How naive." Leo's breath hitched. The weight of those words hung in the air, pressing down on him like the crushing realization that everything he had thought he knew was wrong. Felix's expression shifted ever so slightly, a slow tilt of his head, as if savoring the moment, his twisted reflection of control, a game far beyond any logic or morality. "You see," Felix continued, "strings are more than just tools. They are memories, dreams, fears, anchored to the threads of history, bound to the darkest desires of this town's past. You pull them as much as I do, whether you realize it or not." The marionette's words echoed in Leo's mind, each syllable stabbing deeper than the last. His heart raced, the room spinning as the weight of the curse wrapped tighter around him. The strings weren't just lifeless threads, they were conduits of power, channels through which Whisper Hollow's most malevolent sins were enacted. Each motion, every manipulation, became a reflection of the twisted choices that had haunted the town for centuries. The haunting grin deepened. "Every movement you see, every sway of my arms, every shift in the air, it's not just a display. It's a testament to the entanglement of wills, of souls bound to these strings. You may believe you're in control, but you're as much a prisoner as anyone else who has stood in this room before you." Leo staggered back a step, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He couldn't deny the truth in Felix's words. The lines between himself and the marionette blurred further, each pull of the strings tightening the grip on his mind, making him question his own intentions, his very identity. It was as if the curse had seeped into the core of his being, entwining his thoughts and memories with the strings of despair and malice that Felix represented. "You're wrong," Leo managed to croak out, though the confidence was fraying. "I control this. I'll break you." Felix's smile twisted into something more sinister, more self-satisfied. "You can try," he said, his voice a whispering echo that seemed to come from within the very walls of the theater. "But you will only find that the harder you fight, the tighter the strings will bind." The strings around Felix vibrated once more, a haunting hum that resonated through the air like the tolling of a death knell. The very foundations of the theater seemed to tremble, a physical manifestation of the curse unraveling the boundaries between reality and madness. Shadows stretched impossibly far, the past and present blurring into a nightmare that Leo couldn't escape. "I'll unravel you," Leo said, his voice gaining strength, though his hands trembled. "I'll sever every thread that binds you." Felix's grin remained, a steady, mocking reminder of the futility of Leo's resolve. "You can try," he repeated, "but the strings will always call you back." The theater dimmed as the strings tightened again, pulling Leo into the dark embrace of a fate far beyond his control. Every movement, every breath, felt like a dance performed to the tune of an ancient, haunting melody, the strings playing a symphony of destruction. The room grew darker, every flicker of light vanishing into the abyss of shadow. The whispers of the past echoed louder now, growing into a deafening roar of forgotten sins and unfulfilled desires. Each murmur seemed to claw its way into Leo's consciousness, overwhelming him with the weight of countless wrongdoings. The very air around him felt thick, oppressive, pressing down with a force that threatened to crush his spirit. As Leo reached out, his fingers brushed against the strings that trembled under his touch, vibrating with an intensity that resonated through every fiber of his being. They weren't just lifeless chords. No, these strings pulsed with a dark, malevolent energy, weaving an intricate tapestry of agony and despair. With every slight touch, they seemed to pull him deeper, dragging him into a web that he couldn't escape from. The darkness was alive, an entity woven into the very fabric of the room. Shadows twisted and writhed, taking shape as grotesque figures with hollow eyes and jagged mouths that seemed to speak of unspeakable horrors. The longer Leo remained, the more vivid their forms became, each one telling a story of pain, betrayal, and torment that stretched back through generations. The strings responded to his touch in a way that defied logic. They didn't just move in response to his gestures, they seemed to respond to his thoughts, his fears, his deepest, most hidden desires. Every time he tried to pull away, they tightened, pulling him deeper into the abyss. His breath quickened, his chest rising and falling in panic as the weight of the past bore down on him. It was as if the strings were alive, an extension of something far greater, something ancient, something primal. The more he resisted, the more aggressive the strings became. They wrapped around him like tendrils of suffocating darkness, binding him in a suffocating embrace. His soul seemed to shudder, flickering between reality and the dreamlike horrors the strings conjured. His thoughts became fragmented, as though his very identity was being stripped away, replaced by a hollow, shadowy version of himself. With every pulse, the strings painted scenes of betrayal and vengeance. They played memories that Leo never knew existed, dragging him into moments long buried beneath the surface of his consciousness. Faces flashed before him, those of loved ones who had once stood by him, only to be consumed by the darkness. The strings weaved stories of loss, of alliances forged in desperation, and of bargains that had come at a terrible cost. The darkness in the room wasn't just confined to the shadows, it seeped into his very being. The more he fought, the more it consumed him, a relentless tide that threatened to drown him in its depths. The strings tugged at his very essence, whispering promises of power and release, but beneath those hollow words lay an inevitable doom. There was no escape, no hope of redemption, just the pull of the strings, pulling him ever closer to a fate he could no longer control. "I can't," Leo whispered, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of torment that surrounded him. "I can't fight this." But Felix's eerie laughter echoed through the darkness, a chilling symphony of triumph. "You don't have to fight," Felix hissed. "Just let go. Embrace the strings, and you'll become part of the dance." Leo's fingers tightened around the strings, desperation clawing at his mind. His heart pounded, his breaths coming in shallow gasps, but the strings only grew heavier, more oppressive. The room seemed to expand, the walls pressing inward as if seeking to crush him entirely. His thoughts became a blur, consumed by the haunting melodies of the strings, each note a reminder of the curse that bound him to a fate darker than death itself. In the end, it wasn't just the curse that was broken. It was Leo who untangled the strings, severing the ties between the past and the present. The weight of generations of sorrow, betrayal, and darkness that had once been woven into those strings was lifted, unraveling like a fragile web caught in the wind. Each knot that had once bound Whisper Hollow to its cursed history loosened, releasing the town from its haunting grip. Felix, though still a marionette, became nothing more than a relic of a forgotten darkness, no longer alive, but forever remembered. His wooden frame, once a vessel for malevolence, now stood as a silent testament to the cost of tampering with forces beyond comprehension. The lifeless eyes stared into the void, no longer puppeteering the shadows that had tormented the town. The memories embedded within Felix began to fade, reduced to wisps of haunting whispers that danced on the edges of forgotten tales. Whisper Hollow, slowly reclaiming its peace, started to breathe anew, a place where the darkness no longer controlled its future. Leo, forever changed, carried the weight of the past not as a burden, but as a lesson, a reminder of the thin line between creation and destruction. The strings that once connected him to Felix no longer threatened to pull him into the abyss. They had been severed, leaving behind a legacy of both resilience and healing. A legacy that would shape future generations. In the quiet stillness of the theater, where the final act had been performed, the echoes of a curse diminished into nothingness. Felix, though silent and motionless, held a quiet reverence, a relic of an age when shadows ruled, now replaced by the light of understanding and closure. The town of Whisper Hollow slowly healed. The murders ceased, and the stories faded back into the shadows. The once echoing whispers of darkness and betrayal were replaced by the sounds of daily life, a town finding its peace once more. People ventured out without fear, the air filled with laughter and the clatter of footsteps in the streets. The ancient buildings that once seemed haunted stood quietly, their history quietly resting beneath the surface. Yet, even in this newfound calm, there was an unease that lingered, a shadow of the past that couldn't be entirely erased. For in the quiet moments, when the wind whispered through the empty streets or the moon cast its silver glow on the town square, some couldn't help but glance toward the empty stage. The old theater stood as a reminder of what had been, its desolation speaking volumes. Memories of Felix's haunting movements were forever etched into the minds of the townsfolk, leaving a deep, almost palpable fear that refused to be forgotten. They wondered if, perhaps, in the stillness of the night, the strings that once controlled Felix might stir again, guided not by unseen hands, but by some darker force that had not been fully extinguished. And though logic told them otherwise, the weight of history weighed heavy on their thoughts. Just to be sure, some would peek inside the old theater, as though expecting to see Felix standing once more, lifeless yet alive, watching with his haunting smile. The truth was, the curse had been broken, but the memories remained, haunting, timeless, a constant reminder that even the smallest darkness could cast a long shadow.